When do you think I can just go to ChatGPT and type, book me a flight, my credit card?
Well, first of all, I don't think you're going to want to. But second of all, they have their plugin ecosystem. I don't really seriously think that ChatGPT will be the environment where this happens. I think the thing to watch here is the mobile operating systems, especially.
Wait, I need to be worried because you encouraged me to do this podcast. Today on the program, we had Peter Zakin, investor at Upfront Ventures, and a good friend. Peter, what did we discuss today?
A lot. We went through my career as an engineer, as a multi-time founder, from YC to now Upfront. Talked about both the good and the bad of starting companies and my experience in doing that.
Peter shared his thoughts on AI-generated software, design to code gen, dev playgrounds, ChatGPT versus Google. This episode will be extremely useful and interesting for founders, investors, and anyone interested in technology, frameworks. I had a lot of fun talking to Peter. Hope you will have as much fun as I did. Welcome everyone, another episode of nFactorial podcast coming to you from Santa Monica, California. Our guest today is Peter Zakin, investor at Upfront Ventures. Peter, welcome to the program.
Hey, it's good to be here.
Yeah, Peter is a good friend. We've known each other for 12 years and he's a great product thinker. One of the ideas I have, one of the selfish ideas and agendas for this podcast I have is to explore his areas of interest starting from 2010. That's when he got started into startups, and go year by year dissecting his interests, and then the plan is that this will lead to interesting insights and how Peter's thinking evolved over the years when it comes to startups. This is going to be a conversation of two startup junkies discussing whatever hell happened with startups for the past 13 years.
I'm excited.
Looking forward.
We've been friends for a very long time.
Yeah. So let's start off with a banger, which is how is AI changing the life of software engineers, and how is it changing software engineering in general, and how will it change it in 10 years or so?
Well, that's a big one to start off with. I think, the way I would break it apart is to start with the easy answer, which is, what does software engineering look like today? What does it look like over the next year or two? With respect to AI, I kind of, the phrase I keep telling myself is I call them sleeper cells. And the analogy here is that there are companies and there are products and there are things that haven't happened yet, but which are just so obviously inevitable. And so I think of these things, whether they've happened yet or not, I treat them as part of the current moment. So, you look at what we have now, being a software engineer, and granted, I don't spend as much time these days writing code as I used to, but Copilot is probably one of my favorite software products ever. As far as the impact that's made on my life, even as somebody who doesn't write code that often these days, it's pretty profound as far as what the impact on my ability to code has been with something like Copilot. And there are others, and who's to say whether it's Copilot or it's Cody or any of these other in IDE assistants that ends up winning here. But I think this sort of code completion is this first chapter. I think that the second chapter we're starting to see is things around describing at a high level what you're trying to build rather than code completion. There have been some startups here that I think are exciting. They're still really early, but you could describe to one of these tools that you want to build an API server that can receive HTTP requests and save some kind of data to a Postgres database, and it will set up that code pretty nicely. I had this experience I was just testing something out, and I basically wrote a PRD just like I would as a product manager. And it was like, here's this toy app I want to build. This is the set of functionality that I would want an API to provide, and it did a really great job. I looked at the code, and the code looked good, like really good. And we're still seeing like Twitter commentary talking about like places where AI generated code is maybe not as good as we think it is, but it's really good. And this is sort of where I get back to like my sleeper cell analogy. Like, even if it's not as good as we think it is right now, I'm sort of taking it as given that it is going to be imminently very, very effective at discrete tasks. So if chapter 1 is this code completion and chapter 2 is being able to, in the guise or in the manner of a product manager, define a set of requirements to generate code, we're sort of left at this. I think there's a couple of milestones that we can think about. One being, I want to build technology by just describing what technology should do. I think there's a spectrum of what that can mean. I think the workflow of being a PM, as I was describing, and just like describing a set of software, isn't going to work for everything. But there are certain types of functionality where I actually think engineers and even PMs are going to approach building software that way. I don't think that PMs are going to replace software engineers anytime soon, but I certainly think that more code is going to get developed at that higher layer of abstraction, and so that takes you to, I think, the next 5 years. I think you have more and more developer workflows that start to change in some profound ways. I don't know if that's a satisfying answer, because I'm leaving a lot of things. I'm putting a lot of qualifications on the board. But even just considering that, like if I told you 2 years ago that we would be having this conversation and we would be pondering, the idea of just describing technology that we want to build and expecting that we'd have the technology to generate that software, it would strike me as science fiction. But we're sort of in this weird moment where things are both science fiction and also reality, and I sort of have my feet in both. So that's the 5 year. The 10 year, I'm not sure.
Got it. One of your recent blog posts, you discussed design to code generation, developer playgrounds, and treating agents as users. Can you elaborate on those topics?
Yeah, so we can take this in sequence. So design to code automation, I rushed to write this post because it was a day or two before Figma's last developer conference. And it always feels good to make predictions and have them come true. And this was a quick turnaround. So, I had some expectation that Figma wasn't going to sit on the sidelines given everything that was going on in code generation. And what they released in their last developer conference saw them moving to what I think they would describe it this way, as a new generation for the product. Figma historically services designers, and engineers would obviously, as part of their workflow and having to translate designs into code, spend time in Figma, but they were never first-class citizens. And I think that was part of the rhetoric at their developer conference, which is, we're finally going to start treating developers like they belong here. And there are some features there that I think spoke to that directly.
Like what?
They have a developer mode now. So the experience of being a developer in Figma, you no longer have to guess what components, what artifacts are ready for going into the dev workflow.
So the way I'm going to be using Figma as a developer from now on is the designer, UI UX designer, produces the screens. I take them, and then in V1 I just generate code out of that design, and then I can improve it.
So that's the other thing that they launched. So they have a new experience for developers. One of the like simple features they have is a designer can mark designs as being ready for dev. And then the other big thing, and this is obviously a much more sophisticated set of functionality, is being able to generate code based off of a design. So, I think that's a great step in the right direction, but anyone who's ever been a dev, working off of designs will tell you that's only part of the story. So they get pretty far. So you can generate like JSX React style code from a design. But that doesn't really help you for existing components. Mm-hmm. Also, if it is for a new component, fine, you go and then you can copy and paste. And Figma also now has like some embedded functionality inside of your IDE, so you can generate code from there as well. But even if you do that for subsequent updates to the design, the engineer still has to reconcile those changes in code. And so you have these two systems, Figma and your code base, which are constantly they're constantly like sync. Unaligned. They're constantly like out of sync. And so keeping them in sync is this type of challenge where in the past, I think you would just accept it as granted that like, yeah, of course, a developer has to update their code based on what designers are doing in Figma. But now we're in this moment, as I said before, where it's like, I think we're getting a little greedy as far as our expectations of what software can do. And I think that we are soon going to be at a place where we are going to expect somehow, I'll let the entrepreneurs out there figure out the right mechanics. And for what it's worth, I do think there's enough, there's always a question around incumbents and whether they're going to take the opportunity for themselves. I think that there's enough space outside of what Figma is focusing on that a startup can go after this opportunity. But yeah, I think that we should have an expectation that we're going to have some system in the future that is going to help us keep work that designers do in Figma, keep those changes in sync with our code bases. And what that's going to translate to from a developer experience perspective is not having to do this work anymore. So I like the idea of Figma becoming more supportive and welcoming to developers. But there's also a part of me which thinks about, well, like, wouldn't the best developer experience for Figma be no developer experience and actually just automating a great deal of the work that developers are doing today in that workflow? So I like the idea of design to code automation. I think that Figma is moving forward here in really interesting ways. But the synchronization problem is the trickiest one. It's really hard. And we're even just like scratching the surface of the complexity. There's a lot of weirdness there. And, but yeah.
Describe me the ideal design code solution.
You're making it hard for me. I mean, it's mechanics. There are some clever engineers out there.
I design it, I push on generate
from
button.
A product perspective? Yeah, from a product perspective, I think the experience is that designers make changes in Figma, mm-hmm. and when they're ready for those designs to go into the your development process, they effectively are going to generate a pull request. And you want the designer to feel, and you want the engineers on the team to feel confident that the generated code is doing what the designers want it to do and the PMs want it to do. And also that developers are not going to be uncomfortable with the code that was generated, right? There's a great deal of trust on both sides. But again, like, it's totally crazy to expect that we can do this. And yet, I think on some time horizon that I don't think is 10 years away, I think we will have this kind of synchronization.
Tell me about the future of developer playgrounds?
So I love developer playgrounds. There's a company, val.town. I think they're a great example of this. I think in many ways, Replit is an example of this. Philosophically, I think I have a couple of foundational ideas that just make me very excited about developer playgrounds. One of them is just a secular trend, which, it's been an anthem for me even before I was giving any thought to LLMs, which is this idea that historically the gap between thinking and making decreases. And I call this like the arc of creative leverage. It's ever increasing. It's certainly true with respect to LLMs. If you put me in front of a coding environment, put me in a Jupyter notebook, for instance, which I think is a great example of a developer playground. If you put me in front of a Jupyter notebook without Copilot, that experience is a little anxiety inducing.
Mm-hmm.
I have to do that internal sort of what's the right word? I have to put myself into the right headspace to start coding, and there's cognitive friction getting started, and you've got to get into a groove, right? With Copilot, that groove is just, it's so quick, it's so effortless, to say nothing of an experience where you're just describing in natural language what you want to do. So I love developer playgrounds for two reasons. One is, and this is sort of another like foundational idea for me, which is decreasing the atomic unit of creation. So the simplest way for me to describe this is blog posts versus tweets. It is much, much easier for someone to write a tweet than a blog post for a whole set of reasons. And I think you see this pattern again and again with creative artifacts, that as you make the atomic unit of creation smaller, you make it easier for people to create. And when things are easier to create, the other, sort of consequences, people create more. And so I love the idea of a developer playground because it basically combines all these ideas, right? The atomic unit of creation goes from being a program to being a little function, to being the tweet version of code. So that is very, I think, has wonderful benefits. And then because a developer playground is this creative surface, sort of another foundational idea for me that I go back to all the time is the idea of commoditizing your complement. And when coding becomes easier, like the main beneficiary of that is it's our creative surfaces. And so you basically have a creative surface that is really, really friendly to creation. And it's never been a better time. It's like better time than ever for people to be able to write code because of what's happening in code generation. So all of those things are just like a confluence together that like makes me extremely bullish on developer playgrounds. And I'm a big fan of Valtown. It is it's not a company.
How is it different from Replit?
Good question. So in Valtown, a couple of things. So number one, in Replit, you're basically just getting an IDE in a file system, right? You're basically getting a computer in the cloud. With Valtown, you're just writing functions, basically. So every val is effectively a JavaScript function. The other cool thing about Valtown is it's a collaborative environment. So, crazily, if I create a JavaScript function, you could use that function. So this shared space, you could call it, what's the right term? I guess it's not namespace. but it's a shared programming context, I guess we could call it. There's probably a better term for it. But that's pretty cool when you think about what the potential could be of a internet community of people all writing code and being able to use each other's functions. In some respects, it's very similar to the promise of GitHub of sharing code, right? There's something really special about sharing code on the internet. This is a little bit more dynamic, right? Because you're actually running code. So I'm a big fan of that company. But I think, my enthusiasm for the space is more than any one company. I think we're going to have lots of different, maybe not lots, but I think there will be several big winners around just giving people surfaces to write code. And again, it's never been an easier time for people to get started writing code. And that's only going to increase.
Treating agents as users.
This is a fun one. The agent discourse, there's a lot of it, I have my frustrations with it because I think that there's a lot of ambiguity around what an agent means. For my sake, what I mean by it is basically thinking about new ways for so there are a couple of ideas here. So one of them is creating new ways for applications to work together. So the example, I'm trying to remember this, but the example I think I gave was if you were working inside of Notion, you might want to draw upon knowledge that exists somewhere else. So one example would be you're writing up a technical document in Notion and you want to draw upon knowledge that exists in your code base. You might want to be describing how some service is working, and you could look at the code, but maybe it would be nice for whatever AI agent is embedded inside of Notion, which, we can have a conversation of, I think what exists today in Notion, I think it's like just text completion, but it's not like it's not like a ChatGPT conversational interface that's doing chatting around over your data, that kind of dynamic. But I think eventually we'll have something like that, and when we have something like that, I think it would be very beneficial for you to be able to leverage data that exists in other systems like your code base, or you have your metrics stored in a BI tool or a data warehouse, and you want to talk about your latest your MRR, right? And you don't remember exactly what it is, and why should you? It should be a dynamic value. Well, we should be able to pull that data from that data source. So the idea of combining so the idea of being able to leverage information stored in a third-party system within some app, historically the way you would do that is through a direct integration. But I like the idea of bringing an agent to an app, and having that agent be a kind of proxy that can do analysis, can pull data from your various from the various services and systems.
So within Notion document, you are calling Salesforce agent or Mercury agent, or
and I think there's this like multi-agent world where like different agents are talking to each other, and like those are details. I actually don't think that's how it would play out. In fact, what I was suggesting here, and again, like I'm not being prescriptive. I'll let founders figure that out. I'm really talking about what could be enabled. And for me, the thing that could be enabled is being able to leverage data from somewhere else inside of a context where we do our work. And so there were other examples. Another of them is you're in your customer support tool and you want your customer support agent, whether human or otherwise, to be able to leverage data about the user who's messaging in. You want that agent to be able to pull an understanding, to be able to generate an understanding of that user. And this is just another way in which we can combine different applications. It's a new approach to having apps work together that historically I don't believe was possible. I describe this as agents as users because the way that I imagine bridging these two apps is through an agent type of user. And the reason I thought that was this very like anthropomorphic metaphor where, if I were writing the Notion document and I was trying to talk about our code base and I had a question about it, maybe I would mention a colleague and say like, hey, Jim, like how does our, I don't know, like how does this service work, right? And Jim could fill in that information as a collaborator. But imagine that instead of Jim, there's CodeBot, right? And CodeBot somehow is in Notion. CodeBot being in Notion strikes me as just a fundamentally new kind of experience. And again, I'm not being too prescriptive around, is it CodeBot, right? Or is it just like, do I have an agent who's sort of like my mini-me, my companion, and he has all the same access to all the systems I have access to, but his memory is a lot better than mine.
It's powerful. Like imagine I'm working in a keynote, I'm prepping a slide deck or a startup pitch deck. I don't remember the number. I just ask this data to be pulled from this source.
And I think in this piece, I didn't really...
Extension of my memory, yeah.
I think in this piece, I didn't really talk about it, but it's all part of the same constellation of ideas, which is there are actually unique benefits to treating agents as users. The obvious one is there are certain types of interactions where we're accustomed to dealing with users, but to the extent that an agent could replace a human being for those use cases, that's where it gets exciting. And the exciting thing, to be specific, is that the application that's going to stage these interactions doesn't have to do too much retrofit or agent fitting. They don't have to redesign their application to accommodate these agents. Mm-hmm. So that's why I like the idea of an agent user type. So like another example, you're in Linear and you want to assign work to an agent. It'd be great if that agent could be assigned work the same way that you would assign work to a colleague. So these aren't like, again, I sort of think about it from like a programming perspective. There is some, superclass, and humans are one type, agents are another type, but we're all sort of inheriting some base functionality, or we're conforming to, the employee protocol. Humans are capable of practicing it, and so are agents. So I like agents as users. I haven't figured out how to invest against that thesis quite yet, but as I think is probably obvious, it's like a set of ideas that I get particularly enthusiastic about.
It will change the way social networking startups get launched. I mean, remember back in the day when Reddit founders created 10,000 fake users to populate Reddit. So this time, if you it's easy, right? You just have a bunch of users commenting each other, creating blog posts, and creating the image of a popular party.
Maybe, but to play devil's advocate, I think people might be more paranoid around whether the users they're interacting with being real or not.
Mm-hmm. So it makes better sense in a B2B SaaS as opposed to.
Well, I think that there is. I think the fundamental nature of how we interact with software is just changing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I guess what I'm trying to say is that I am just as perplexed and enthusiastic, and the perplexity and the enthusiasm are interlinked. I think, I'm just as enthusiastic about what's happening in consumer as I am in enterprise. I think we're going to see a lot of weird stuff in both.
What are some of your main ideas from code smithing, AI generated software?
Yeah, so this was a blog post that I wrote a few months ago. I called it Codesmithing, and I sort of came up with the term. I don't know if I came up with the term, but I sort of used that term because I was thinking about, like, what do you call an AI agent that's capable of writing code? And I like the suffix smith. You've got like blacksmiths, and you have all sorts of smiths, and forgetting the others, but somebody has a skill, and like a skilled worker. And I like the idea of thinking about agents as a type of skilled worker. And so in the blog post I was writing about, like, how do we make sense of the fact that that AI is capable of writing code? And I basically, I don't think it's a particularly opinionated essay so much as just a survey of how I'm viewing the space and ways of categorizing. But I started off by talking about code completion, which we've already talked about a bit, and moving on to I talked about extensibility. So if you figure that there are certain systems like Salesforce, which there's a whole industry around Salesforce admins and engineers writing code inside of Salesforce. Maybe it becomes easier for us to configure those systems. If you're, building out your Salesforce installation, maybe you don't need to maybe you actually don't need to hire a consultant to build out your dashboards. Maybe a lay user is able to describe what they want, and they can generate the dashboards that they want. Maybe instead of writing, Salesforce has their own query language. Instead of writing, that in their native language, maybe you write it in natural language. So all of these systems like Salesforce that are highly configurable, highly extensible, strike me as interesting substrates for LLMs. The other example, of course, are like internal tools. Like, I think Retool is having an amazing moment right now. They're another creative surface. It got a lot easier to create things. I think that there will be, as a result, a lot more internal tools that are created. So those were a couple of things that I highlighted there. And then, on the more speculative,
just double click on Retool. How did the creation of ChatGPT and this LLM revolution changing what Retool is offering?
So there's a number of things, and I'm not going to get it totally right, but or at least not comprehensive. But the base level implementation of like LLM coding that Retool has is like, for those who are not familiar with Retool, it's an internal tool creator. They provide a programming environment, like a visual coding environment, where you can create effectively simple CRUD apps. Is probably the fathead of use cases for Retool.
So before Retool existed, software companies had to employ engineers to do this. They had to employ junior developers to build those tools.
Yeah.
But now any PM can use no code to produce it.
So Retool is this extraordinary company. I watched their demo day video, fairly recently. It's great. It's 2 minutes, and
same vision.
It's the same vision. I remember it. David, the CEO, he says that the core insight behind Retool is that over some percentage, maybe it's 50% of all software created is internal. And then I think his second insight was that like most of these internal tools are leveraging same kind of components.
Say that again?
The same kind of components.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have these like twin insights
Across different companies.
Across different companies.
So humankind is wasting efforts because those tools are internal.
Yeah. And I think I think there's an interesting historical question of what the reception to retool was early on. But if you think about it historically, and this may be a little bit of a rabbit hole, but retool was doing something that I think if you had pitched me on retool when they first got started, I would have thought it was ridiculous. Namely, that they were going to have write access to your database. Now, to be fair, not all, I think the vast majority of their customers don't actually provide direct write access to their database, but a lot of them do. And that would have struck me as just being like unfathomable and a non-starter. But they have been phenomenally successful, and their customers, whether they're providing direct access to their database or they're exposing API endpoints, they now find it much easier to build these internal tools, and they can stand up internal tools with a lot less engineering effort than previously.
There's a library of templates you can leverage.
And so like the sort of canonical example of what you could build in retool is like you could have a table, and the table could fetch all of your users, and it's a paginated table, and like it's not the like prettiest table you've ever seen in the world, but it works. And instead of taking the time to write markup and JavaScript that'll make that possible, instead you're just dragging and dropping a reusable component and defining a SQL query or defining a REST API request body that's going to pull the appropriate data. And so that makes it a hell of a lot easier to build these tools. So you populate a table, and then you can create a button, and you could put a button in the tool, and each the button could maybe mark a user as being you should blacklist the user or something, right? So it's those types of use cases that all companies have, and Retool makes it very, very easy for developers to stand up these tools. So but it's a developer tool, right? So even though it makes there's a lot of no code involved, there's a low code, right? So there's some code elements, right? You got to write your SQL queries. You may have to write custom JavaScript, and so the fact that LLMs make coding a lot easier. Retool, one of the first things they did was they now you can use LLMs to write your SQL queries. So for someone who's not very good at writing SQL, that's me. I am an engineer, and I'm not particularly good at writing SQL.
I always found writing SQL so mechanical. You just you write your plan in English, and then you translate this into collection of joins.
Yeah, and then you're
so mechanical.
You're Googling things, and you're going on W3 schools and trying to remember how things work. And so the friction that just is eliminated here makes a big difference. So that's one of the first things they did. And then they just had this developer, they just had a recent launch, I think it was last week. And it was really cool to see what they've built. So now they have, they're not just doing code completion and SQL generation. They're also doing making predictions around what you might be trying to build, and then helping you build out the full app. So the UX, the creative space around, or the creative search space around building new UX around LLMs is not. We're still so early, right? So we've sort of figured out that code completion is really helpful. These recommended smart actions that are deeply personalized and unique to what you're trying to do, and informed by what you've what you've done so far in this creative canvas. That's like the next iteration, but I'm sure they'll continue tinkering. But it all goes back to these sort of like foundational ideas, right? Like this is a creative surface, like writing code is becoming a lot easier, and like people are going to find it much easier to build tools and retool. A lot more internal tools are going to get built. It's a great time to be a company like Retool.
Why are smarter machines are bad for supply side modes?
So
sounds complicated.
I remember back in 2015 or 2016, and I was working on Hyper, which was my first company, and I remember thinking about Uber and the threat of autonomous vehicles. And the thought that I had was, you had people who would, talk about Uber's strategic strengths around their driver network. I remember thinking, well, what happens to that driver network when we have self-driving cars? Like suddenly it doesn't really matter that Uber's driver network is larger and stronger than Lyft's, because ultimately, like if you replace the drivers, who cares? So that sort of made me, that was sort of like first initial thought around what happens to companies whose strength is derived from a supply side moat. What happens to them when the supply side gets automated? So self-driving cars is, one question. I think we don't know how it'll play out because it hasn't totally happened yet. Again, this is one of these weird sort of uncanny valley type moments in time where it's both true that we have self-driving cars.
The future which is always decade away.
The future is here and it's not distributed yet, right? And it's hard to reckon with what the consequences are. It's hard to calibrate to the future moment, which is kind of here, but also not.
I guess like when it comes to self-driving cars, the blog post is also moving. Like we are sort of, we take it for granted that like the Tesla FSD is amazing, but now we're like, how about this edge case? How about that edge case?
The like marginal improvements.
Yeah, it's so hard.
They desensitize us.
Mm-hmm.
If we took a time machine back to 2015 and we showed, Cruise has, self-driving taxis in San Francisco, we would think, oh my God.
You tried it?
I haven't.
I haven't either. That's something I
want to.
That's something I should definitely do.
My wife doesn't want me to.
Is it? It used when we just launched it was only from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. or something. Is it now 24/7?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know the answer. But you have to imagine that like if Cruise rolls this out to more and more cities, Uber will roll this out to more and more cities. That's not good news for the drivers. And there's a whole other conversation that we can have about that. But suddenly when you're comparing Uber to Cruise, the question is no longer who has more humans and what the network effects around that are. The question is like who has more vehicles? It's a vehicle question. In the vehicle question, when it becomes about vehicles, it's a lot less of a defensible business. Because then what you're competing on is just that single side of the equation. It's just who are your users. I think we have a similar dynamic in if you look at a number of these sort of like Web 2.0 multi-sided networks where you see supply side moats that are now vulnerable to automation, I think you're going to see some weirdness. So, another example is Stack Overflow. Now, this is kind of an unfair example because ChatGPT was probably trained on Stack Overflow. I actually don't know if that's true. I suspect it is. But regardless, even if it is, I no longer need to go to Stack Overflow to answer my coding questions for most things. Most of my coding questions, most of my Stack Overflow usage has now been replaced by code completion or ChatGPT. Both of those things are removing the value of Stack Overflow, which, like, historically, its advantage over competitors was we have more people, we have a better network, we have a better reputation system. People want to contribute to Stack Overflow more than other sites. In a world where AI provides answers, doesn't matter how many great answerers you have, the machine will win. You see this in a subtle way. You see this with social networks, with TikTok versus the sort of algorithmic feed versus the friend-based feed. So, TikTok, you can come to TikTok or Reels. You don't have to have any friends, but it will find content for you. Facebook, historically, remember the Chamath line around before he was, a podcaster extraordinaire, and when he ran growth at Facebook, he has this famous talk. He talks about the epiphany, or he talks about the number of users it took for a Facebook user to become active, to become a sticky user. And it was like, you need 7 friends in
11 days or something?
Yes, it was something like that.
Yeah, and right? That's why they had, hey, you might know this guy. And yeah.
And so that's what they optimize for. In a world where your feed, where you're streaming, you're getting all this content, all this consumer content from, it doesn't matter where, if you have friends on the service or not. It's all about, have we figured out what kind of content you like? And so this is the light version of what I think the future holds. And I think a lot of people see this as pretty apocalyptic, of AI generated content. If we get to a place where, and I think this is very far away, but I don't know. We get to a point where, TikTok, having a decent sense of what kinds of videos I like, starts generating videos without any human involvement, where it substitutes the human labor outright. That's a case where, again, you see this contrast between the machines replacing humans and destroying these supply side modes, where a supply side mode in social networks would be your friend network. And I think that's already taken place to an extent. I'll give you one more example, which I think, again, is similar in nature to the last one. It's Netflix. Netflix has a supply side mode around its relationships with studios. If we get to a point where we can generate TV shows and movies based off of AI, it's no longer going to be a question of who has access to the studios. Actually, it may be, but it'll be a different type of supply that you'll have to build up, right? So I think all of which is to say, like, as you replace humans, as machines are able to substitute the work of humans, I think that you see multi-sided networks, particularly networks that depended on that human labor, become a lot more vulnerable, and the strategic landscape for them just changes fundamentally. Mm-hmm. So that blog post was exploring that set of ideas. I'm sure there are other examples, but it's something that, like, I'm now primed to look for, and that's kind of the point. There's nothing. I don't think there's much in those ideas that you can turn into a company, or maybe it's useful to.
It's a good insight.
Yeah.
ChatGPT versus Google. How did your view change from December of last year to now?
Okay, I like that question a lot. So I had thought a lot about this. I found myself thinking about search towards the end of last summer. Anyway, the initial thought that I had in December, there were people who were looking at ChatGPT, and they had what I thought to be an overreaction. There was a lot of thought around how this is a Google killer. And my view is maybe, but Google is extraordinarily well situated strategically. So if you look at browser adoption, the way to segment it, on mobile, Android has like 70% market share. So let's assume Google has 70%, Chrome has 70% market share on mobile. Those numbers are probably not exactly right, but they're probably roughly right. And then on desktop, Chrome is at like 60 or 70%. So I think the number is that like Google's ownership over the browser is like 66%. Or sorry, no, it's more than that. It's I think their ownership over worldwide internet traffic is like 90%. I think that's right. We can check that. But even, if it's between, 70 and 90, it's like extremely high. And the point that I think is really important is that the competition between Google and ChatGPT is not a competition around features. You're like for most people, for most search use cases, the thing that they're just trying to get an answer as soon as possible. And the path to getting that answer as soon as possible is the search bar. They're in the browser. Like that is the context in which they're looking for answers. If that changes, sure, I think there's a conversation to be had. If that doesn't change, then the winner of search is the winner of who owns that search bar. And for, Google's ownership over, global browser market, it's Google. So there's I think more of an there is an innovator's dilemma question, which has to do with how do you situate ads inside of a chat interface. And maybe it comes to that, maybe it doesn't. But even if it comes to that, I think unless the underlying browser competition changes, unless we start using a different browser, I think Google is really, really well situated. And again, sort of the amazing thing about Google is, and it's sort of there's sort of nested moats. So even if Google starts to see competition on the browser level, they're still protected on the Android level. So 50% of 70% of mobile traffic, maybe 50% of internet traffic overall is pretty immune. It's really hard for me to believe that any company other than Google, as long as they own the browser, as long as they own 70% of a mobile operating system, it's really hard for me to expect that somebody's going to uproot Google. I think Google is a really, really smart company.
Mm-hmm. Web3 as a social system. This is a omakase of different topics, but that's the intention.
So Web3 is a social system. I think the Web3, I don't spend a lot of time these days looking at Web3, which I feel somewhat bad about, because I don't think anything has fundamentally changed other than the price and other than enthusiasm. I think the price changing, who cares? I don't think that reflects anything material. I think the enthusiasm changing does, and that's probably my most honest justification for why I'm not spending as much time in crypto these days. We can talk about that, but maybe I'll just address sort of like...
Quick question. Why did your enthusiasm change? Did you just get burned out?
I think it was that. I think also I'll give you so my history with crypto, I was skeptical of crypto since basically 2013, 2014. I remember pitching, I was at Venmo, I remember pitching that we should allow people with Bitcoin wallets to use Bitcoin as a funding source. So I wasn't anti-crypto. I think I've always liked the idea of internet money. The internet should have a currency. I believe that on just sort of a general philosophy that the internet is a new social space and we should have as little friction as possible when it comes to commerce and transactions, and having a native currency I think makes a ton of sense. I think what was harder for me to get around was I didn't understand Ethereum. I remember seeing the initial ICO. I saw that Vitalik was a Thiel fellow, and I just couldn't understand. I remember reading it and being like, why do we need a Turing complete programming language for cryptocurrencies? It didn't make sense to me. I think what Vitalik saw then, he did, was that there was actually use in being able to build applications on top of a decentralized ledger, both for financial use cases and otherwise. I think the otherwise part I didn't fully understand, and the financial maybe it did a little bit. And so, you started seeing, if you look at the evolution of crypto thought as distributed by the thought leadership. In 2015, Minchi, who was my co-founder, who we've all worked together before, and but Minchi and I remember we looked into crypto in 2015, and our perspective, I think we were looking at utility tokens. Do you remember utility tokens?
Mm-hmm.
That was the talk of crypto back then. And we didn't understand why you would need something. I think Filecoin was around back then, and I just didn't understand. Dropbox was fine. Why do we need Filecoin? And why do I need coins to purchase storage space? It just didn't make any sense to me. I think Naval was big in propagating those ideas. I think he had a post that blew up on Hacker News. So I didn't really get it. And then I saw more and more people going into crypto, and I think crypto has had this problem basically from the early 2010s, which is it has this is the line I used to use in talking about crypto to people who weren't super into crypto. And it's crypto has attracted both the worst people I've ever met and the smartest people I've ever met. And I think the aesthetics of the people that I really didn't care for going into crypto really turned me off to it. And it just didn't click for me. I think what ultimately clicked for me was a couple of things. The main thing was probably just the belief that if developers were building applications inside of this new, let's call it this new system, there are going to be applications that users would benefit from. And if there were users, there would be developers. So there's this really great, reinforcing loop between developers and users. And, at the tail end of 2021, with the rise in NFTs, I think there was enough enthusiasm among developers and users to suspect that flywheel had started. And so it was no longer, to me, an academic question of should crypto exist, but now that it does exist, we can't argue that it shouldn't exist. It's happening. People are building applications, and people are using it, and people are getting crypto wallets, and we're designing new infrastructure for the internet. And as somebody that's something I love. On some pretty foundational level, I love the internet. I think it is the coolest freaking thing. And I think some of the ideas that I get most excited by are attempts at making a better internet. The internet is great, but we are locked into HTTP. We are locked into a system, a really great system with some really awesome design choices, but we are locked into a system that was designed over 20 years ago. And so I like the idea of trying to be thoughtful now that we've had 20 plus years of experience with the web. I like the idea of thinking about what are new things that we should do to modify it, right? And so crypto very much appealed to, I would call that internet idealism. So I have that. I have internet idealism, and I thought in a lot of ways crypto really resonated with me there. And I felt that we were at a point where the developer flywheel was starting. The developer flywheel now seems to have paused. The NFT surge, I never really got super excited by it. I didn't fully understand it, but it was fun. It's fun. It was gambling. Gambling, whatever your moral takes on it are, and I'm pretty puritanical in my taste. So I don't love the idea of people, gambling on the internet and that's, maybe that's too paternalistic and puritanical, but whatever. But it was fun. Gambling is enjoyable. There's a rush. There's a dopamine that you get to it. And so I think NFTs really tapped into that. My hope was that NFTs were going to evolve into something more than just like being a story about art or being a story about gambling. And, there are people who are really enthusiastic about art, and I respect it, right? Like, I think Fred Wilson is like one of those people who's really championed, crypto art. And like I don't know him personally, but Fred just sort of seems like, he's one of the luminaries of our field, who also seems like a high integrity person. And so I take him, sort of at face value that like, if he's enthusiastic about crypto art, I believe it. Right. And so like, why shouldn't we have crypto art? Like, I think that use case makes sense. I think what we haven't seen was what we thought would happen afterwards, which was, NFTs starting to represent other types of assets. I don't think we've seen that to the same. I mean, we've certainly seen it, but I don't think that we've seen it go mainstream. And so, so that's a long-winded way of saying that my interest in crypto is slightly opportunistic. It is to a great deal proportional to developer interest in building applications in crypto.
What do you think, apart from the financial use case, which is more or less proven, what use cases are most promising for Web3, you think?
Well, so the question that got us on this topic was talking about, I wrote this post called Web3 as a Social System, and it was basically, had this idea in mind, which was that there was this really coherent vision of the web. There was this really coherent vision of the web that Facebook and Zuckerberg articulated in the early 2010s. And, it started, I'll tell you where it ends, and then I'll tell you sort of where it started. So it ended with Cambridge Analytica. It ended with, political tension and controversy in the United States in the aftermath of the 2016 election, and Facebook having to do damage control, and the changes that they had to make to their API. But running up to 2016, from 2010, you had folks like Dave Marin building up Facebook platform. You had acquisitions around, there was a company, Hot Potato. Do you remember Hot Potato?
Not really.
Hot Potato was like, it was like verbs and nouns. It was like, it was a social network, and you could, I don't know if it was automatic at the time or if it was manually entered, but instead of setting a status update on Twitter of what you were thinking, the updates on Hot Potato, if I'm not remembering incorrectly, but the updates on Hot Potato were like, Peter's playing tennis, or Peter is listening to music.
Based on your...
Yeah, so maybe tennis is a bad example, but I believe it was the inspiration, if I'm not remembering incorrectly, it was the inspiration for it's not, I don't know if it was Open Graph but like the Graph API, like automatic actions. Like, do you remember the time in Facebook?
Oh, that I remember.
Yeah, so there was this moment.
Peter is playing Zynga game.
So it was the Zynga game. It was Spotify was sort of the really funny one. It was like, Peter is listening to Rage Against the Machine. I remember literally, I was at the gym and I was listening to Rage Against the Machine, and a friend of mine messaged me. He was like, "Is everything okay?" And I was like, "Yeah, I like Rage Against the Machine, I guess." So there was this moment in time where Facebook wanted to be the primary identity service for the internet. It was going to be the identity that you used to interact with every single app that you used, whether it was an app that you could there was like all the questionnaire apps, right? Or later it was Tinder and Hinge and all the dating apps that benefited from the Facebook social graph. In 2012, 2013, 2014 is when Tinder came out, I think, at the end of 2012.
Correct.
So anyway, basically
they started in LA, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
The best place to do a dating app.
Yes, great place to start a dating app.
And the GTM was
parties.
It was parties with a lot of women.
Yes. They sort of figured out sort of the strange economics of we'll call them economics, but the strange dynamics of building a dating app. Which, by the way, is a totally separate conversation. The history of dating apps, I think, is fascinating, which we could talk about. But like Facebook, early 2010s, they want to be the principal identity system for the internet. They wanted not only to be the identity system, but they also wanted to be this hub where activities that you took in third-party apps would be streamed back to Facebook. And so, the vision, if I can sort of articulate it a little bit, is like Facebook is the identity layer. It is the social graph that enhances your experience wherever you go. So wherever you go on the internet, you're bringing your social graph with you. In addition, by bringing your social graph with you, we can enrich that experience, whether it's you want to see what your friends are listening to on Spotify, or you want to date your friends' acquaintances or friends, right? So there was the social graph, there was the identity system, and then there was also the data, not just being used away from Facebook, but bringing data from outside of Facebook back to Facebook. And so it was this hub model. And so in the newsfeed, you would see not just what activities were happening on Facebook, you would see the activities that were happening everywhere. I don't know if this is a good internet. Like if you were going to talk about, I used this term earlier, internet idealism, is the web better if we have this sort of dominant identity system and we sort of live constantly under observation and everything is broadcast? I don't know if that is good, but it was a coherent vision for the web. And in some ways it actually was good. It enabled apps to get developed that otherwise I don't think really would have worked. Tinder is a great example, but there are others. I think Airbnb is a great example. I think that Lyft is a great example. Uber may be an argument that it didn't need to exist because I don't think Uber really leveraged Facebook Connect in the same way that Lyft did. But regardless, I think the point stands that if we were to...
In what way did Lyft leverage the
They
Facebook
used
graph?
the Facebook profile picture, if I remember correctly, in the app.
Okay.
And I don't believe
And you
they
couldn't
did that
update
in
it.
Uber. I don't remember.
Yeah, and that created the trust between a rider and a driver.
Yes, exactly. It was this is a real person. We'll have to validate that, but I'm pretty sure that was correct.
I took my first Lyft ride in 2013, fall of 2013. You might be right, actually. Yeah, I remember connecting with Facebook, and I think it was the same picture.
And
I also tried Sidecar the same year.
I don't remember Sidecar.
Sidecar. They raised 15 million and then just ended up. They might have created the ride sharing revolution.
I think that's right.
I think that they did.
I don't know if it was them, but it was a company that
One of them.
Yeah. But I think the assurance of having a driver sign up with Lyft, and maybe actually the assurance from the driver's perspective of having the rider sign up with Lyft was this is a real person. If something bad happens and we need to track them down, right? We'll be able to do that because Facebook is somewhat legitimate as a reference on who somebody is. But yeah, Facebook, the social graph in particular, enabled a bunch of applications. It actually was pretty enabling for a whole ecosystem of apps. So I think that's good. I think that an internet, a web where we make it possible for more apps to succeed is a good internet. And so at least in that regard, I think Facebook was terrific. Obviously, things went sour. We can debate whether Cambridge Analytica was, Facebook being irresponsible or Zuckerberg's comeuppance. Whichever stance you take on that, the reality is like we lost the social web. And so my view on Web3 and some of the things that I was really excited by was that this might be an opportunity to rebuild the social web on a better identity foundation. And so I really, really believe that. And I don't know if I believe that anymore.
Like ENS kind of thing?
Yeah. So ENS was fine, but there were problems. But ENS is sort of
move in that direction, in a way.
Well, I think ENS like they were trying to do this, right? They wanted to be the identity layer in Web3, but the problem with ENS, from my perspective, is the absence of a social graph. Mm-hmm. Like anybody could claim to be pzakin.eth.
Yeah.
But the only way for you to trust that pzakin.eth is in fact me is, well, now the only way for you to do it would be to like ask me, like, who am I? But the only way for you to do it without the extra friction of having to like personally verify it would be something like a social graph. That's how we did it after all. That's how we do it today on Facebook. It's how we do it on LinkedIn. You're somebody with, there's a founder that I've interacted with a couple of times, and his name is it's a common one. So there are like a number of other founders who have his name. So how do I know which of him is him and which of his is, his impersonators, right? And the only way for me to do that is, looking at, his LinkedIn or Twitter and seeing like, okay, like on LinkedIn, I could see what companies he's worked at, and I can do that sort of triangulation based around knowledge I have around where he's worked before. The social data I think is more useful. It's like, oh, who does this person know that we have in common? So that kind of like social signal is helpful in helping us make, basically validate social claims. And so that's the value of social signals. It's in validating social claims. And crypto by default had an identity system, but not much in the way of social signals. And so I think it was hard for us to really trust in identity claims. And I think we were missing that layer of identity infrastructure that would have enabled the kind of applications that we had in Facebook ecosystem. So I was really looking for Web3 to sort of take up that mantle and try to rebuild a sort of a social backbone for the internet. It hasn't happened yet. I'm not bearish on crypto. I think actually, like, if I were being truly intellectually honest, I'd probably spend a lot more time there than I do now. But it's hard because, again, like, my crypto only matters if developers and users are building and using. It could be the perfect structure for the internet, and it won't matter unless there's actually activity. And I think there's activity today, but like I don't see the same type of surging that we had in 2021. So maybe as an investor, I might be too late. By the time maybe as an investor you have to make the bet before that surge comes.
Not when it's over.
But being an investor is hard.
Yeah. Before we move on to the evolution of your interests starting from 2010, one more blog post I would like to discuss is metagame.
The metagame, yeah.
What are some of the ideas from that blog post?
I'm trying to remember when I wrote it. I think that I wrote it at the end of 2019. And I wrote it because it was a time in my career when I was going through this process of trying to figure out what my next company was going to be. And I was thinking a lot, about how do you come up with startup ideas? How do you evaluate startup ideas? Conveniently, Paul Graham has lots of thoughts here. And as with most things, I tend to think that he has good ones. He wrote a great article, a great essay called How to Get Startup Ideas. And so I wrote an essay that is sort of my personal notes on that essay. And the post is written both as me sort of sounding out how I view startup ideas, and also a little bit, and maybe this is always true of anything I write, is I'm writing a little bit to myself and trying to give myself the advice that I wish somebody would give me. And I think I did that here. So in the essay, I basically write about, sort of my own like annotation of his ideas. And I actually like this essay. I think it's the best essay that I've written publicly. I don't know that like there's a huge catalog of work. I don't know if that means anything, but I do like this essay personally. But anyway, like towards the end of the essay, I sort of wrestle with a question which I think a lot of founders wrestle with. I've wrestled with it. And the question is, what are you trying to solve in coming up with a startup idea? Are you trying to come up with an idea that you think will be successful? Or are you trying to come up with something that's not just that, but something that you're passionate about?
Or vision of a future you wish existed.
Can you commit yourself to this thing? Does it appeal to you on some emotional
independent
level?
of a result?
Yeah. And for me, like I've felt this before, I've felt this afterwards. I have found myself at times considering working on startup ideas that I felt were smart. Like they were the kinds of things that I would want to invest in someone else to go build. But for me, I'm not quite mercenary enough to go work on something just because I think it's smart. It has to appeal to some part of me that's a little bit more emotional, maybe isn't the right word, but like it has to fulfill something.
More missionary than mercenary, yeah.
Yeah. And I wrote the essay, and the conclusion I came to is basically like being successful, building software, as long as it listen, I think there are companies that do bad. Like I think Jewel is a bad company. Like I don't like Jewel. I will rarely say about a company that like I don't like them. I don't like that company. Because I just don't like the idea of encouraging people to smoke. I don't think it's good for them. So I think it's that is one of those cases where I feel morally I wouldn't want to be associated with that company. But I think in general, I'm generally pro. I mean, I think I'm extraordinarily pro technology. Even things that I think strike most people as being frivolous, or take the most boring B2B SaaS app that you can think of, something around I don't want to even make I won't say anything because God forbid we've invested in it or want to invest in it or I want to invest in it. But take the most boring category you can think of for you personally. Even there, I think that there is virtue in building software, because being a technologist, coming up with new software, new techniques for building things, I think helps move the industry forward. We're all part of a very connected ecosystem, and I think participation in that ecosystem is morally good. So that's how I look at it. There's certainly nuance. There's certainly varying degrees of good. But I tend to be pretty positive on tech. And so the conclusion that I came to in the essay is basically, if you can view building a technology company as a kind of competition, as a kind of sport, and I think that journey could be in itself worth it. I don't think that the startup that you start has to be. I think a lot of people put, and me included, myself included, I think we put the things that we devote our time to on such a pedestal. What is worthy of our time? I worked on a travel startup and a workflow automation startup. Are those things worthy of my time? For me, yes. I worked on things that I was deeply interested in. I loved working on the things that I built. I was fascinated by the tech that we were working on. I felt joy building these things. And in a very true way, I loved the people that I worked with. For me, like, though that was having those things is just like the level of like good fortune that you have to be able to do that is just tremendous. So the conclusion that I came to in the essay is basically that, like, if you can find something where like you find good people and you get to build technology, like, you have hit the lottery. Like, that is an extraordinary outcome. Like, tacking on the task of trying to build something that is going to be like appeal to some like core passion is just, it's just harder. And so for me, like, did the things that I worked on, like, were they the like most fulfilling things that I could have worked on? No, but I mean, I don't know, maybe, but I will say that I loved, like, I was passionate about everything I built. I've never worked on a startup that I wasn't passionate about. And that's actually contrary to the advice I give in the essay, which is actually like, don't be so obsessed about finding something that like you're passionate about. You can be a little bit easier on yourself and your co-founders, and building something that you think is going to work is actually the most important thing. As it happens, over the course of my last startup, I actually didn't take that advice. For better or worse, I personally couldn't bring myself to work on something that I wasn't passionate about. So
do you think people who, here's something we discussed before the recording started, is that a lot of creative people, they come up with startup ideas in the sense that they ask themselves, I wish this product existed, let me do it. No one is doing it, let me do it. And that is a very, very, very pure endeavor, right? Because it's very creative. It's you're like an artist.
Yep.
You want this painting to be painted. You want this book to be written. You don't really think about whether the market wants it, how big the market is. Do you think? And in Paul Graham's essay, he's discussing how you need to observe and notice startup ideas, right? Do you think people who are more, well, I've met people who, had different businesses, and then there was nothing common between them, and they were very successful. And I would ask them, hey, are you, like, I don't see the connection between this companies you started. What is your passion? He said, my passion is money. I just love making money. So do you, and that was so simple yet profound. Do you think people who love money / love building things which work out, love building things which market wants, they have an advantage over more creative people who don't really think about markets?
I think it's a great question. I think that having a ruthlessness around the objective nature of what you're doing is helpful. I'm not that. Like, my old co-founder Derek and I, we used to talk about this a lot. Like, are you an artist, or are you, I don't know, maybe are you an artist, or are you a businessman? Or I don't remember what the other term that we used was, but I think, listen, like, it's pretentious and sort of nauseating for a tech person to describe what they do as art. It's also, I think, at an extreme stupid. But there's a creative.
At least you'll be retweeted by VC brags.
Yes, exactly. It's that kind of thing, and like I get it, right? Like, and VCs can be pretty nauseating, but I do think that some founders are driven by some creative urge inside of them, and they want to see their ideas come to life. For me, that's what drove me as a founder. Like, I could get excited about having an insight that other people haven't had, or I could get excited about a user that I cared about. But like, I think the thing that was most exciting to me was on some really primal level, the magic of having ideas and turning them into reality it's amazing. Like that is, for me, just, that's what I would most want to devote my intellectual energies towards doing. I think there's something profoundly and deeply fulfilling in that.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the evolution of your interests starting from 2010. You did YC in 2010 in the times when YC only 5 years old. Most of the world did not wake up to YC. YC by then only had one exit, which was Heroku. Actually Heroku came later, 2011.
No,
right?
No.
So by 2010,
good question. I think Heroku had been around.
Heroku was around, but there was no exit.
Fair.
Correct. So I think by 2010,
because Rails was like 2008.
Correct.
Heroku must have been 2008 or 2009.
But the Salesforce bought them in 2011.
Yeah.
So basically, what I'm saying is that YC in 2010 was not part of the startup culture as it is now, in some ways, right? But tell us why you applied, how many companies were part of that batch, what were you like as a founder back then, and how old were you?
All right, so I was 19 when I interviewed, and I went out to YC to build a social network for college students. And I think from their perspective, and at the time it was PG, it was Jessica, it was Trevor Blackwell, Robert Morris, and I think Harsh Tagar, or Tiger, I don't know how to pronounce his name, but they were the partners, and I hope I'm not forgetting anybody, but went out to that interview, told them I want to build Facebook for college students, basically, which is a funny idea because Facebook historically was for college students. But I felt that Facebook was, it was at this moment in time, and there's actually sort of historically, if you look at it, there were a number of companies that were trying to basically saw Facebook as going through growing pains and believed that Facebook was not going to be a good place for it was not going to be a good place for like young people to hang out with their friends, basically. So like my use case was like I wanted to like talk to my friends online without my like parents and like old high school teachers being able to see what I was saying, right? And then the other sort of insight that I had was that like smaller social networks were really valuable. I felt more comfortable sharing things in a group of 20, 30 people than I did, with an audience of like 1,000 people, which struck me as being just like who are you to 1,000 people? You're this like really diluted sense of self. Whereas to like a group of 20, 30, 50 people, you can be a little bit, more honest about who you are. And I thought that was appealing. And I thought that the affordances of social networks at that time were just like not conducive to that. So I went out to the YC interview. I basically pitched them this. I had nothing but like balsamic sketches. And they were like, cool, like, let's go beat Zuckerberg. And I went out to YC that summer. I had a co-founder who was a good friend of mine. And the two of us, we were not, I think, ready to build a startup. And, the company crashed and burned, and my parents were thrilled because I didn't have to drop out. But it was a great experience. And like,
So go ahead.
Yeah, I was, I got to see people. I think there were a couple of things that were really cool. Number one, seeing Silicon Valley from that perspective at that moment in time was really cool. We were in Mountain View, and like I have this whole theory about San Francisco, which is basically that finance people killed San Francisco, but that's maybe not for this conversation. But but I basically mentioned that because San Francisco became the epicenter of Silicon Valley tech But initially, right, it was the South Bay, and it was Mountain View and Palo Alto. And I know I lived across the street from the Stanford golf course. I lived at, what was that place called? I don't remember. So was hanging out in Mountain View, was seeing startups getting formed at YC, and just the atmosphere was just everybody around me was starting a company.
What companies were part of that batch?
All right, so we had PagerDuty.
Nice.
We had .cloud, which became Docker.
Wonderful.
We had Hitmonk.
Adam Goldstein.
Adam Goldstein, Steve Huffman.
Steve Huffman, yeah.
And then I'm trying to remember who else was there, but I think PagerDuty and Docker were, those are two very important companies. It was great to be around. Oh, Antonio Garcia Martinez was part of that batch of Chaos Monkeys.
He was building a company?
He was building a company, and that's the company that he describes in Chaos Monkeys. So I was part of this YC batch. Thankfully, he never talks about me in that book. But it was very cool to be able to interact with Paul Graham. It was very cool to be able to be around those companies, to be a part of the ethos of 2010 Mountain View. It was probably the unhappiest summer of my life. I came out to Mountain View, I came out to Palo Alto thinking that I was about to build the next Facebook. And, the company was a failure. We never really got off the ground, and it was very clear very early that we were in over our heads. And I went back to school, I felt totally disappointed and heartbroken in a way. But the sort of upside of it was, this was what I wanted to do in my career. And that kind of clarity was great. Mm-hmm. And I saw my friends who didn't have that clarity, and they were trying to figure out, maybe I should go to an investment bank for the summer or consulting. I was like, no, I don't want to do that. So that summer, I probably should have gone and worked for a startup, but I was an intern at SoftBank Capital, in Boston. It was in Newton, Massachusetts, which was funny.
And we're talking about the summer of 11.
Summer of 2011. Yeah.
Okay.
So I was there that summer. I don't think that my ambition at that point was never to go into venture. It was just I want to spend more time with startups. And I figured that would be an interesting way to do it. Mm-hmm. My objective, my ambition, at that point was to start a company. I wanted to start a company as soon as I could, because I just failed miserably. And I don't think there's a part of me which felt that I was going to feel this pain until I had rectified it, until I had proven that I could build an important company. Mm-hmm. That was probably the wrong attitude. It was the wrong attitude in a lot of ways. And I talked to founders today who were really young and like I was, and their view is if they don't start $1 billion company by the time they're 30, they've failed. And I can tell them, I've moved past 30 by a couple of years, and life is still fine. I haven't started $1 billion company yet, but I think my perspective leaving, coming back from YC, leaving college was, all right, we're going to go start $1 billion company. Mm-hmm. And that was my ambition after that.
Let's talk about 2011, some maybe interesting startups or products you used back then. What were you thinking? Path, I think, came out in 2011, which manifested the idea in a way of this private social networking idea.
They were part of that that genre or that wave. Mm-hmm. There was a company whose name I'm now forgetting, which had a sad ending. I forget the name.
What did they do?
They were a decentralized social network, also taking aim at Facebook, because there were, 2010, there were some privacy misdeeds, or at least there was an uproar around privacy with respect to Facebook. And, those kind of concerns plagued them for a long time. And I think they sort of hit a crescendo in 2010. And so, I did my my social network in 2010. Path tried to do it, and there were others as well. There was a company in my YC batch, The Fridge, basically building the same thing that I was building, but not targeted at college students, but focused on these like micro social networks.
Yeah, I think the social network moment, the movie happened in the fall of 2010. It's a big moment.
It was a huge moment. It was a huge moment. And I think that also, it inspired in, smart, precocious, nerdy, if I may say so, engineers and otherwise, on college campuses, from, whether it was Princeton or Stanford or wherever. But like people wanted to be the next Mark Zuckerberg. I mean, Mark's reputation, I think, it's gone up and down. Mm-hmm. But there was a time at which, I think people, it's funny. I don't remember if it was Aaron Sorkin or who it was, but if it was Sorkin or if it was Michael Lewis, but one of them said about either Liar's Poker or The Social Network, I think it was Michael Lewis, about how like people took the wrong message. But both of those books, both of those pieces of media.
Yeah, it's a good point. Like Liar's Poker was about not going to Wall Street, but people wanted to go to Wall Street afterwards.
Yeah. Like Liar's Poker becomes this kind of
it's so cool. I want to be part of it.
Yeah, it's an advertisement.
Yeah.
It was meant to be a cautionary tale. It becomes an advertisement. The Social Network sort of similarly, but like the Social Network, I don't know. It's hard to say whether it was intentional or not, but the Social Network becomes this. It becomes a kind of, and even the soundtrack becomes the soundtrack for all of us who are trying to build big things and small, and from like these relatively humble beginnings on college campuses. So the myth, sort of the ethos of a college founder, it goes from being this sort of like, why are you doing this? Enjoy, being a college student and like go to the frat house or whatever. And suddenly, I think the romance, the narrative of the Social Network becomes something that people find very appealing. And I did, even before the Social Network, I don't think my first couple of years in college, I didn't like particularly like college, which is ironic because all I wanted in high school was to go to Princeton. And then I got into Princeton and it was like, well, it's life. It just has a new location. And like things that were hard in high school are like still hard, right?
How did you come across Paul Graham's essays?
I don't know, but I had. But when I applied to YC, I applied to Dreamit, which is another accelerator, and I probably applied to Techstars, and there were a number of accelerators. None of them wanted to talk to me. The only one who wanted to talk to me was YC. Mm-hmm. And I got in and came back. Social Network happened, and suddenly being interested in startups became. There were lots of other people who were interested, and it became a great way to connect with people and find people with similar interests. I think the other thing that was useful for me at the time was people who wanted to apply to YC, people who wanted to do startups. I was somebody who had, even though my company had failed, I'd ventured out that far, and so I was somebody that people wanted to talk to mm-hmm. about that, and so that was fun for me. It was a great way to meet people.
Okay, let's talk about 2012. Maybe some areas of interest you had in 12.
2012. So, Quora was a huge company at the time. And for many years, they attracted just the best talent. They were amazing at recruiting. But as a product, early 2010s, Quora was an extraordinary place on the internet. You basically had... So
like a text version of Clubhouse.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like Clubhouse in its heyday, which surreally, or now it feels years ago. But Clubhouse in its heyday sort of captured the early vibes of Quora, where you had people who were, stars in Silicon Valley, stars of the technology world, were sharing stories and knowledge, and not just sharing stories and knowledge, And this also predates tech Twitter. Like tech Twitter, in my view, didn't really become a thing until after Quora. And I think tech Twitter, in a way, kind of was it was not a good thing for Quora. I won't say that it like was a killer. I don't think it killed Quora. By some measure, Quora has done really, really well. They're doing very, very well as far as like worldwide traffic. But as a community, as a web community, Quora was something really special. And you basically had the same people that today are on tech Twitter, but instead of Elon Musk saying things he probably shouldn't, you had people like Elon, sharing longer form writing in a collaborative space. And so that was really cool. You had, people today who are, very prominent venture capitalists building up their reputation on Quora. Quora today is still an amazing treasure trove of information. So yeah, Quora was amazing in 2012.
It's interesting. Like when you start out, you focus on a niche, you focus on a very small audience, and then you become really good. But at some point, you have to go for the broader audience, and as a result, the quality degrades, and then your early adopters, they leave the platform, and now it's kind of it's now a department store as opposed to a nice cozy bar.
Well, there's I think it's the Groucho Marx quote about that place is so popular nobody goes there anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's the line or something like that. But it's very difficult to scale community. It's very difficult to, lots of things are really difficult to scale. It's hard to scale credentials. Would Harvard still be Harvard if they graduated 100,000 students every year?
Yeah.
The dynamics here are obviously different, but we have, there are challenges with scaling communities, prestige, lots of social things are hard to scale. So yeah, Quora, I don't know what I haven't thought too much enough about it, but the Quora story is unfortunate because they started as a direct contrast to Yahoo Answers. The sort of argument back then was we are going to build a question and answer site on the internet. We're going to build the knowledge, the aggregated knowledge or aggregated expertise or whatever you call it, or however they described it at the time. We're going to build it for intelligent content. And I think there's still really intelligent content that gets created on Quora today, but also a lot of the things that plague Yahoo Answers plague Quora. And I think my biggest critique on Quora is their recommendations algorithm must think that I'm just completely deranged because the things that generate clickbait they tend to send me, and sometimes I fall for it, and I see content about airplane disasters. I don't want to read this. This isn't content that I really want to know more about. It's perverse and but they just keep sending it to me.
They get you through via email notifications.
Send me my
hey, you might be interested in this.
Yeah, so maybe that's still better than Yahoo Answers, which was laughable. But
I used to not just reading but contributing to Quora and then looking at the engagement numbers and all that. It was fun being maybe top answerer or in some topic, and
it was great. It was a really great property on the web.
One perk they had, they would partner with Huffington Post and then would cross-post your top answer, and then that kind of you become a top writer or something, and that was really cool.
We basically don't have the we basically don't have that diversity of different surfaces on the web for we just don't have that many social properties on the web anymore. The web is it's Twitter, for me at least. For other people, I guess it's Instagram, right? But I think it's sad that these spaces that used to be, we used to have more more hangouts on the web.
If you were to think about, if I were to remember my information diet, I used to be on Google Reader. I had like hundreds of subscriptions. I was sad when it died. And Tech Twitter, you're so right. Tech Twitter was so different back then. I got most of my knowledge from Google Reader, maybe Quora, and Twitter was what? Twitter, I was just sharing links. I was not. Yeah, I feel like I was reading people, but
I mean, I'm a big fan of Twitter advanced search. So like I use Twitter as a memex. So I will just like if I want to learn about something, I'll do a search on Twitter, and then I'll see like what content has been produced around that query by people I follow. And for me, it's just like essential. Like Elon could charge me a lot more than he charges me today for my monthly membership. The value I get out of Twitter is actually like pretty substantial, even just across like even just from that feature. But
give me an example of what kind of searches you make.
Oh, like if I'm trying to learn about some piece of technology that like I don't know that much about, or I'm trying to go deeper on it. What was it? Like I was looking at. I'll give you an example. Like if I wanted to like look at the history of like Snowflake, like a really great resource is just to like search Snowflake and then filter it by people I follow. Mm-hmm. And I will literally just see the historical take on Snowflake from my feed. And you'll sort of notice like, Snowflake was started probably like 2013, 2014. Mm-hmm. 2015, 2016, there's not that much content, but like by 2019, there's lots of content. And so seeing the like evolving historical perspective is really cool. So like I use that feature a bunch. And then we were talking about so when I do those searches, sometimes what I'll see is posts that and I also do that for myself, right? Like the way I use Twitter is very much in anticipation of a future query. So like I'll jot down notes, I'll try to connect tweets together, so that if in the future I come looking to see like what my thoughts were on some subject, I can easily find it. So I'll do that a bunch, and sometimes I'll find old tweets of mine from like 2012, 2013, and like they're like there's like for some of them like they're like so stupid. It's like I remember I like built like little like Twitter utility, like little apps on Twitter, and like some of it is me literally just sending messages on Twitter for my little bot to capture, and it's like you couldn't get away with that today, right? I mean, maybe you can with like Readwise. They have like a little Twitter app, right? You mention @Readwise, and they'll like save a link. But I had a flow like that, and like it didn't look good. It was like @apparator, like add, and then the URL, or maybe I wouldn't say add, or I would say like hashtag like delicious or something, right? And like those types of tweets are just like such a artifact of an era long past. We would never do that today because we're just like, maybe I'm revealing too much, but I think we're all overly conscious of what people think about our tweets, and are they getting good engagement, etc.
I think another interest of yours in that area reflected in the product we were building together, three of us, you, Minchi, and myself, which was a bookmarking tool.
Yes.
Tell us more about not necessarily the product we were building, but we were building if I remember correctly, the tagline was social network for writers and readers. So a place where you would save your...
Yeah, there was a lot here that was stupid. There was a lot here that was not. The parts that were probably not stupid, and which I'm still really interested in, like, I still think social bookmarking is cool. I think there's something special about a list of links. That's one of my weirder views. We can talk about that, but yeah, like so what were we building? We were building a social bookmarking app, and you could see what your friends were adding. And I think one of the big things that we cared about was this notion of evergreen content, right? And
100%.
Right. It was like, what is content that like is always going to be interesting to us? What do we do with it? We shouldn't just like let this stuff just like be unfindable. We want it to be easily accessible, and we want to see not just like what things we've read that we cared about, or what things our friends have read and that we cared about, but we want to see the commentary. We want to be able to annotate these things. I think that kind of thinking would be really interesting. That kind of product would be really interesting today, given everything with LLMs. Like, you want to see. Somebody wrote an article about the history of Snowflake. I should see recommendations of like other articles that sort of fit that topic. So that was like the general like space that we were operating in, and it was a really pretty product. Minchi did a great job on the design, and I think we were. It was a good project. Probably not a startup, but good project.
One side effect of, if I were to imagine this product at scale, it's kind of useful to showcase yourself as a member of this intellectual world, where you showcase yourself based on the kind of stuff you read, right?
Yeah.
So it tells a lot about you. The kind of blog post you read. Yeah.
I had an idea way back then that social networks were economies of value is not the right term, but like economies of, we'll call it recognition. And it was like there are different communities online, and you try to represent a different facet of yourself on those communities. And I sort of like the idea of treating different communities as like different facets of yourself. And I thought, Facebook was, an arena for a certain type of, a certain facet of yourself. And maybe there were other stages where we wanted to present a different facet of ourselves. And I felt that our intellectual interests was one of those. I think had we been successful, I think we would have fallen prey to the same, or we would have been vulnerable to the same types of problems that Quora ultimately I think was vulnerable to that we just discussed.
Yeah.
Namely that like a lot of this like the sort of fragmentation of online identity it got defragged. It got bundled up into Twitter. And so, what are my intellectual interests? They're on Twitter. That's where I read, it's where I write, it's where I share my thinking. I have friends from like high school, although not that many, but my friends from high school or my, friends from college who aren't in tech, and they see me, talk about things, that are tech related, and they're like, what the hell is he talking about? It's not
a place to share it.
Yeah. So I think they'd prefer, to the extent that I share any content, they probably prefer I don't share, my tech musings, which, they're not that interested in. But, we've got one social graph. We've got one social space where we share. So
one company I remember we were discussing, I think in the middle of the summer in July, we came across this company called Kipt. Right? It was a.
Do you remember? Do you know what they became?
No, I don't. But I remember it was an extension.
You're gonna love this.
It was a Chrome extension, right? Where you where you would save links. What is it? What is it now?
Well, they got acquired by Coinbase.
What did they buy them in that form, or
it was a talent acquisition?
So they pivoted to something else.
No. They bought Kipt.
They bought Kipt.
I'm pretty sure it's Kipt.
Coinbase came out in 2012. Okay, that makes sense.
So they got acquired in 2014 or so, 2013. They were a YC company. Coinbase also a YC company. Mm-hmm. You're going to love this. I'm so excited. They go to Coinbase, and then the founder who ends up starting Linear.
Wow.
Yeah, so Linear was, and I can't remember his name, but he came out of Kipt. That was his startup. We
built our version of Kipt.
Exactly.
We actually had in our mind we thought we were better. And
I don't know that we were. I don't think we were better. I think their product was actually quite good.
But the product was better. But in their case, we had some other product ideas. Yeah.
I think the thing that was cool that I was really excited by. I'm still excited by. I still love this about. I still call it adventures in hypertext. Like wikis, I think are a really cool artifact. I've been obsessed with wikis for a long time. I thought that wikis were going to be an intriguing artifact for Web3. I think wikis will be an intriguing artifact in AI. Seems like every wave we have, it all comes back to wikis for me. But what I wanted to see, with Dewey, I think one of the things I was really excited by was this idea of like collaborative curation, and being able to basically build documents or syllabuses with other people. And again, links are, it's hard, if you think about the web in a very abstract, high level aerial view way, links are the fundamental unit. They're the atomic unit of the web, right? So wikis and are their own little mini web, and so I find that to be exciting. And yeah, so there's more thoughts there, but
12-13, you were at Venmo.
So joined Venmo in October of 2012. Yep. And I was the 15th or 16th employee there. They were like 36,000, something like that, monthly active users. They had just been acquired a month prior by Braintree. I joined there. My thought process was, I'll stick around here for 6 months and then I'll go start a company. But on the bright side, we just stopped working on Dewey, and I really wanted to go get a job. And I had an interview at Google, and I got the job at Venmo, and said, skipped the interview at Google, and I went to go work at Venmo, and it was great. It's probably the best place I could have gone, honestly. And I got to see that company grow from 30,000 actives per month to over 2 million 20 months later. And
probably hundreds of millions now, or maybe tens of millions.
I don't know what the numbers are today.
I mean, it's like a de facto way to send someone money in the US. Correct, in the US.
I would say, sort of like estimate, I'd say they probably have 40 to 50 million.
Yeah.
I'm sure they went asymptotic close to when I left. The other thing that happened, which is sort of funny, and sort of the secret sauce in Venmo was, listen, they built a great product, and the product was inherently viral. A user on Venmo sends money to somebody who's not on Venmo. They want to come claim their money. They sign up for Venmo, right? They have a good experience. They then use it, and it goes on and on and on. So they had an organic growth rate. I think it was like 8 to 10% month over month. So like quick, like rule of 72 math, they're going to double every, if it's 10%, they'll double every 7 months. Braintree, credit to Bill Reddy. They should, by all accounts, like maybe they shouldn't have, but like by all accounts, an argument could have been made that like they should just take the talent and shut down Venmo. Like, there were lots of things about Venmo that were super dangerous. Like, we had a public feed. There was fraud potential, which is true of any peer-to-peer payments app. But to their credit, they had this vision of owning both the merchant side and the consumer side, and felt that they could build together next generation commerce experiences. I think there's a question of whether that actually came to fruition, and how useful Venmo has been to PayPal. I actually think the numbers bear out that Venmo has been very useful to PayPal. At the very least, it's been strategically valuable. I don't know financially, but I think it probably has, and we could talk about why. But that was the sort of thesis back then, that having both sides would be really useful. And the thing that they did to execute on that strategy was they gave Venmo, for effectively the first time, like a real marketing budget. And so we started doing $5 referral bonuses. And on the one hand, that obviously encourages some bad behaviors. On the other hand, it also encouraged some really great behaviors. And our growth rate went from maybe 8 or 10% month over month, eventually to like 20%. And so, I'm there for like a year. I think by like, from the time I joined, maybe like on my like 1 year anniversary, like we were at 1 million users. So to go from like 30,000 to 1 million in effectively a year was just insane. Maybe it wasn't 1 million, maybe it was 800,000, but like, the sort of cool thing about exponential growth is it's sort of hard to believe, and then eventually it becomes, holy shit, like this is inevitable. There's a line in PayPal experienced this. I forget which one of them said this, but one of the early PayPal people said that like, we knew at some point, maybe they had like 20,000 users or something, that like it was inevitable. And I think that, I probably wasn't smart enough to see it as early as 30,000. But by the time that like our growth rate was 15% and we had 200,000 users, it was very clear what was happening. And so the marketing budget was just hugely instrumental in that. And there wasn't like, I guess the thing I say about Venmo, right, was like there wasn't product innovation in my mind. The product stayed mostly the same over my tenure there. The thing that changed was the marketing budget. Kudos to Bill Reddy, like he and Ikram and Cortina, like, and Mike Vaughn and whoever else, saw it, like they played they did phenomenally. They grew the company.
Mm-hmm. What did you do next?
So I left because, I had this sort of chip on my shoulder. I wanted to start a successful
Fun fact,
company.
Creator of Nas Daily was your teammate back then, right?
Nuseir. I met Nuseir. He was interviewing. And my story about Nuseir, which I think he'll be fine with me sharing, is he comes in the interview and I liked him immediately, and it was just clear to me that he was a really special person. And he tells me in his interview that he doesn't really want to be an engineer, or he doesn't know if he wants to be an engineer. He's like, I want to be a PM or something. It was some variation of that, right? And I'm like, all right, like for your other interviews here, like tell them that you really want to be an engineer. Because we're not hiring like an intern PM. We don't even have PMs at this point. And that's my story about his interview process. But yeah, like he joined and like it was just very clear to me that he was a really special person. And what he's built is just so impressive. I've done this with a few of my friends. A few of my friends have gone on to start things, and my feedback has been, don't do it. Like, you're making a terrible mistake. Like, this idea is not good. And
Wait, I need to be worried because you encouraged me to do this podcast.
That could be a terrible sign. I told him, like, I don't think this is a good idea. I think you should go build something in software. And he was thinking about other things to build. And thank goodness he didn't listen to my advice.
The timing was so amazing because he leveraged Facebook, and Facebook was just competing with YouTube, and the videos was their new product, and they were really, really encouraging users to build good videos, and they would promote it in the feeds. That was such a great...
He also, the other thing about him that I thought was cool, and maybe he wasn't the first to do it, maybe everybody else was doing it, but it was the first time I had noticed it. But he used subtitles in his videos.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
And it was the first time I'd seen someone do that. And that was the sort of thing where, like, there's a lot that goes into having built what he built.
Amazing creator, like the consistency. Daily video, 1 minute. This is Nas Daily, and this is my minute.
And yeah, it was really amazing. The thing that I still don't understand, which I think is amazing, and I understood it even less then, was when he started to have fans who would come and meet him wherever he went. And it was incredible to see this person who was my friend and who I'd worked with become a figure that was known across the world. It was really cool. Mm-hmm. And there was something, he was authentic, and he created content that was digestible. I'm a big fan of atomic units being small. Mm-hmm. It was a minute, right? It was a minute every day.
Yeah, a minute every day.
That's 1 minute. See you tomorrow.
Exactly. Yeah. So powerful.
He had the catchphrase. just really, really awesome what he did.
Mm-hmm. So now you decide to leave Venmo.
Left Venmo. I left. So the story of me leaving Venmo, and is I, Minchie, who we'd worked with, was one of my best friends from college, and he and I had talked for a while about building stuff together, and I finally wore him down a little bit, and I remember I was in my home in Williamsburg, New York, and he was like, all right, like, let's go start something. And we didn't know what we were going to build. We just sort of had this idea that the two of us together, with some amount of time and a lot of hard work, was going to net out something really great. That was a bet that I think both of us were willing to make any day of the week. And as soon as he told me he was ready, like, I told my parents I'm moving, right? Like, I bought a ticket. I told my friends, like, between the time he told me he was ready to go start something and the time I left, it might have been 2 weeks. And it was sad to leave. My family was in New York, and Venmo was an amazing place to work. For me, at least. I felt truly that I was close, that I was friends with pretty much everyone who worked there. We were a team of like 50 people. It was just starting to get to the point where like everybody there wasn't like a friend, but it felt for a long time that way. And I don't think I've had a professional experience that was as fun as my time at Venmo. And I talked to Venmo alums, and like a bunch of us say very much the same. I was talking to somebody last week and I was like, yeah, it's the most fun I ever had professionally. And they were like, yeah, same. And that's a credit to Ikram and Cortina. It was a great experience. It was hard to leave, but I really, really wanted to go start something, and Minchie was ready, and it was time for me to do that.
And tell us about the exploration which led you to hypertravel. What other ideas you pursued along the way?
So I moved I book a one-way flight. I've got a backpack of stuff. I sleep on Minchie's couch, his room, for like a couple of weeks. His roommates eventually in San Francisco. His roommates get tired of me, and they're like, Minchie's like, Peter, you got to go get a place. So I was like, I found a place. And the first thing we built was an iPhone app called Once. And Once was an app that you would use to take a picture one time every day. You would write a caption on top of the picture, basically about your day, and it would happen at like 5 p.m. every day. 5 p.m. or 8 p.m. I don't remember what it was. And then, sorry. You could take pictures throughout the day, but you could only, but your like story for the day, basically. Snapchat didn't have stories yet. Your story for the day basically was like that one picture. So we kept things, again, really small atomic unit size. The main problem we were trying to solve was we wanted people not to have to like think too much about what they were sharing. The point wasn't to share a pretty picture. There was a time on Instagram where like it was all about filters and taking pretty pictures, and it was very performative. It's still very performative, but maybe it was a little bit more like artistic than it was performative. Maybe that's truer to say. But anyway, the idea was that there was a lot of cognitive friction in deciding what was worth posting. And our attitude in Once was just like, you should post what's real. You should post the daily goings on in your life. And lowering the friction that way, we thought would make people more comfortable sharing. And that was what we built. And basically, I'm sort of getting to it, but like it's basically like that app Be Real. It's just like Be Real. A precursor. We worked on this for some number of months.
I remember the picture I sent there. I remember it was on Product Hunt. I commented, yep. I uploaded, and when I posted a picture of I was at my parents' place. I took a picture of my plate of tomato or something, and then Minchi commented, "So Jobsian of you." I remember his comment for some reason, just stuck in my head.
Well, it's funny talking about this, right? Like, what was like? I'm thinking about how we built this, right? We built on Parse. You remember Parse?
Yeah, of course.
Amazing.
Acquired by Facebook.
Yep. For like 80 million or 150.
Actually, less than that. I think it was a 40 million acquisition.
Oh, it's got to be more than that. I think it's more, but we'll check it.
Yeah.
Parse was an amazing product.
Oh, it must be 80. You're right.
I think it's 80.
Yeah.
Parse was an amazing product. Made it so easy for us to build our back end, so we could just spend all of our time basically in iOS land. So yeah, it was an iPhone app, and then we started pitching investors because we were running out of money, and investors were just like not interested in talking. But investors were just not interested in investing in consumer social, or at least they weren't interested in us as consumer social founders. And I remember sort of, one of the founding team, one of the set of founders that we got to know a little bit were the Mindy team. Do you remember Mindy? So Mindy was an app. They were well-funded, SV Angel, I think Box Group, some other people, well-funded, French founders, beautiful app. And it basically let users create music videos. Or not music. Basically, you could overlay music onto a video. So it was basically like a music video. And it was basically like what TikTok, basically before Musical.ly. The thing Musical.ly got right that Mindy didn't get right was, probably a lot, but a big part of it was Mindy was focused on like the social network. Like you had, it was, I don't think they had fully figured out what the social dynamics were. Maybe there's, I don't know, now that I think about it, I think there's probably more nuance to it, and I'm not articulating it well. But anyway, Mindy was a precursor, really interesting, just a little bit early, and just didn't quite have probably the recommendation algorithm was probably the big part. But in any regard, like Mindy was interesting. So there was a generation of interesting social app founders at the time, and we wanted to be part of that, but we had trouble raising money, and investors were basically want to see traction. I think the other thing that was tough about social at that time, there was a number of apps that were getting like 100,000 users and just flatlining. They're basically plateauing there. And then so we decided we've got 4 to 6 months. We need to raise money. Investors don't want this. Let's go do something else. So we abandoned once. We made a list of all of our ideas, and this was just awful.
What are some of the ideas you were thinking?
Podcast advertising network was one of them. One of the ideas was people selling food out of their homes. So like the cottage food, cottage kitchen, whatever. I forget what the.
So basically, I cook for 5, but if I will have only 4 members in my family, I sell the spare.
Basically, amateurizing kitchens. So if you're a good chef, and like, why can't you cook,
for all your neighbors,
stew for all your neighbors, right?
Solid idea.
It's a great idea. Like, it should happen. There have been a lot of attempts. None of them have worked. There was a recent one Andreessen funded, whose name I'm now forgetting, that tried to solve some interesting problems around packaging and distribution. And, if you ask Minchi, there's probably a whole set of others, and lots of which I think ended up anticipating some companies that were either notable or successful. But the one that we ended up building was Hyper. And Hyper basically came out of an observation that Minchi had when he was at Google, it's really funny to look back at this now, 10 years plus since, or I guess it's almost 10 years. Google, per Minchi, had been exploring conversational interfaces, as way back as 2013, 2014. And they were trying to build the order for Google to build a conversational interface, it would have to be not just good enough to be worthy of the Google brand, which I think is a real risk that incumbents have. But the other thing that it would have to do is it would have to be good at everything, right? Like Google doesn't have really clean boundaries around what it's used for as far as like getting information or solving problems. It's a pretty general purpose tool. And so our idea was instead of trying to build a general purpose assistant, a conversational assistant, let's go build a conversational assistant for a particular vertical. And we chose travel because travel seemed to us to have a couple of advantages. I think the main one was that the metaphor we used to think about a conversational assistant was, it's like a personal assistant. Like, what do people use personal assistants for? And, we'd worked at companies for a couple of years now, and we'd seen how some of the, higher ups at our companies use their assistants. And there's some diversity around assistant. Is it a personal assistant? Is it an executive admin? There's all sorts of assistant types, but the use case that we sort of honed in on was travel. The execs, the companies we worked at, had people book their travel for them, and we thought, well, if they have it, if they pay people to do these things for them, that's probably a better experience than what we have to do. So we sort of took that as a given. In retrospect, might not actually be true, but that's another conversation. And we focused on travel. So we built a conversational AI tool that would help business travelers book travel. And it basically came from this very inelegant sort of evolution of ideas, starting from Google, is probably not going to focus on a specific vertical. Conversational interfaces are something they're looking into. Let's look into it too, but let's aim at a very specific category, and specifically a category that people already have some familiarity with, as far as like using an assistant to perform tasks for them. So travel fit the bill. There's like a lot of precedent for people having, whether it's assistants booking for them or travel agents. So that was like a very appealing idea to us at the time. And this, so on this, we raised money. We raised from Shanna Fisher, who's a wonderful investor, who's keeps sort of a low profile, but has basically been the first check in some very important companies. And she was great. It was lovely to work with her. But anyway, she invested in us, and then Greylock put in a small check, and we're off to the races. And the adventure that we'd set out for ourselves, like, let's go come up with a startup idea in 9 months and go through our savings. We cut it awfully short, awfully close, but we survived, and we raised a little bit of funding, and we built out a team, and we found customers. We ended up getting traction among law firms. Law firms, turns out, do a ton of travel, and we're actually surprisingly open to trying out new products. We launched in January of 2020, and a month later, we had an acquisition offer.
Not 2020. You launched in January of 2016, I would say, right?
January of 2016.
Yeah.
So we launched in January 2016, and then had an acquisition offer a month later. Mm-hmm. And we were young, and for us, it was an opportunity to mark a win. And that was personally really beyond like economically, it was personally really meaningful for me, given my YC experience. And yeah, it was a victory, and we felt that, okay, like, we cut out a little early this time, but the next time that we go start a company, we're going all in. And effectively, that's what I did in my career. So, I sold Hyper, which was great for us, and then
quick question. So customers, let's say law firms using Hyper, as a result, they didn't have to spend time booking flights.
Yeah, so we were sort of in an awkward competition with the executive admins.
Uh-huh.
So the executive admins are very protective of the people they work for, the partners of the law firm. And, they are open to trying new tech, but they're also, I think this is true in lots of areas where software tries to encroach upon human manual labor. People don't like to feel like they're automated away. So that was one tension we sort of had to navigate. But law firms were surprisingly open to trying us out and seemed to be having a good experience. And, that was where most of our demand was coming from.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. And how did the acquisition come about? Was the company acquire one of your clients?
So we had a sales meeting. So we reached out to this company, TradeShift. One of the execs there is a woman named Sarika Garg, who's a founder in her own right, and led up a division inside of TradeShift. And we had gotten in touch with her actually because we met her husband, Anshu Sharma, who runs a company called Skyflow. And Anshu is he was a Salesforce product exec. He was a founder, investor. He was early investor in Workato. So he was a great person to get connected to. And he, thinking about companies that, had a lot of travel, he recommended we chat with Sarika. And, Sarika and us, we stayed in touch, and on sort of a whim, we reached out to her as the product developed more and we launched in January. We're like, hey, maybe now would be a good time for us, basically doing the sales re-engagement stuff. So we reached back out to her, and she set up a meeting for us to meet with what we thought would be the decision makers for whether they wanted to use us for travel. So I had a sales pitch deck. I go in, I go through my sales pitch deck, and then at the end of it, I'm expecting them to ask questions about a pilot, et cetera. And Christian Lang, the CEO of TradeShift, was like, we'd love to use it, but we actually really like to buy you guys and bring you onto the team. And, it was totally out of nowhere. And for us, it was a really exciting outcome.
What does the company do, TradeShift?
So TradeShift is, they got their start as an AP automation company. So really large companies like Nike will have lots of invoices that come in, and they've got clerks who you've got to go through and make sure that the invoices are all proper and legitimate. And tools in the AP automation space like TradeShift will help to automate that process and validate, what invoices are valid and handle the payment process as well. Mm-hmm. So they started in AP automation, and they've moved into procurement. They handle, they build out private marketplaces for companies. So they're really in this procure to pay stack. And they also, they have a pretty large catalog of offerings, and I'm not up to date on where their company is currently at. So maybe their product line has changed, but they also made inroads onto SMBs and mid-market. They created a credit card product that was built on Amex rails, and they were basically a Brex before Brex. And they brought us along. The value proposition for them was they saw travel as a complement to their credit card product. It was a value-add service. Maybe it would help them attract more customers, sort of the same way that Amex had, Amex Travel Concierge, or whatever it's called. So Amex has their own concierge product, and TradeShift, I suppose, thought that they would have their own in Hyper. So that's what sort of motivated that acquisition. Spent a couple of years at TradeShift. I think the viability of, TradeShift had a pretty large product catalog. I don't think that, although we ran it for, a year and a half at TradeShift, Minchi and I both moved off the product. I didn't think it was the most valuable thing for them to be spending their time on. These sorts of things are always tough. And when your company gets acquired, you both feel an obligation to, see through the promise that you make when you get acquired, right? I think they would have, their perspective in acquiring us was we were going to offer, we were going to help grow this service. And as we got there and sort of saw things on the ground, we advised them to put us on higher priority items. So they did. And, I think in our own ways, we had a productive time at TradeShift, worked with some great people. But, obviously it wasn't, maybe not obviously, but obviously to us, it just wasn't the size of company. It wasn't the nature of work that we were really interested in. And so we both left after our vesting period was up. And, Minchie started a PhD program, and he just graduated last week. So he's now Dr. Zhang. And
he started in 2018, correct?
Yes. 17, so there was a year gap.
The great bet on AI.
Before
the world woke up.
Exactly. And then I took time to figure out what my next startup was going to be. And I ultimately, I went through South Park Commons, which is a community in San Francisco of, basically it's a community of technologists, some of whom are researchers on sabbatical, some of whom are founders,
How does South Park Commons work? Like, do you have to pay a annual membership fee? Is it a sort of community / co-working space / venture fund, or what's the idea?
I don't believe there's any fee. If there is, it would be nominal. I assume, since I don't remember paying it. The deal that they have with the startups or with the founders who go through SPC is basically that if you start a company, they basically have some advantaged look at your company. The deal terms change, but it's something like a discount relative to other investors. Mm-hmm. And if it's not, then apologies to them for mischaracterizing. But they're an amazing community. There are some really excellent startups that have been a part of the community. Some of the famous examples are Render or Pilot. Those are some famous startups that have gone through SPC.
Talking about AP software.
Yes. Yeah. Well, they're taxes. But so SPC is a great community, really amazing community of founders and technologists. And I was lucky enough to be a part of it. And, I'm a big believer. I think one of the things that YC gets right is putting founders together. I think there's a great advantage in having startups building next to other founders and or other startups. And SPC replicated that just as YC did. And so I found it to be very beneficial to spend time there. The founding process is so lonely. It's usually just you and your co-founder, if that. And being surrounded by other people going through the same things, it is, I think, a very good thing for your sort of intellectual atmosphere. If you have ideas that you want to toss around, there's always a smart body nearby to talk to. And I found it immensely helpful to be a part of the community.
How long is the program? How do you apply?
It's not really a structured program in length.
So you can hang out as long as you want.
I don't. I don't want to say who it was, but I know, because not that there's any shame in it, but some very successful founders spent like more than 2 or 3 years at SPC. Mm-hmm. If you think about what life would be like for a technologist, whether it's a researcher or an entrepreneur, without SPC, it's lonely.
Yeah.
Being a part of that community helps make you feel like it's a routine. It's an office you go to maybe every day. Mm-hmm. It's people to be around. So if for nothing else, I thought it was very useful in that regard. And above and beyond that is, there's some really great people who are permanently involved in it. And they ended up leading the round for my last startup. And I really enjoyed working with them and just have only the best things to say.
As part of the player in the conversational chatbots genre, can you describe this chatbot wars of 15 to 17?
Yeah,
that period.
So it's kind of funny because when Minchie and I started working on Hyper, nobody was doing this. There was one company we knew of that we discovered as we started building, whose name I'm now forgetting, but they were doesn't matter, but they were building basically the same product. Really competitive with us. They ended up not getting acquired, but just fighting it out. They raised, I think, $10 million from Bessemer. They ended up pivoting from being a chat-based travel product to handling recruiting travel. So their use case became if you're an interview applicant and Palantir wants to fly you out to come for an on-site, instead of you booking it and then going through this terrible process of getting reimbursed, they would basically have you do the booking through this service. So they specialize in recruiting-based travel. And they're still at it, I think. So there's that company. And then, I'll throw a little bit of shade. We pitched, what's his name? The guy who started Kayak. Paul, I forget his last name, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, we pitched him. He was running a venture fund, and we're like, we'd love for you to be involved. And he said, I actually spoke to one of his partners, and they told me we're done with travel. We've spent our time here. We don't want to do anything here. And then I think they started a competitor called Lola that was literally just a copycat of our product a few months later, which the competition is inevitable, and so there's no license to ideas. But
whatever they portray in Silicon Valley is real in the show.
No, I don't know. Listen, I think that ideas don't exist in a vacuum, and when you go and you talk to an investor or to another founder, I don't think there is a promise. There's no NDA. There's no promise that that person is making that they're not going to ever compete against you. I think the only thing that rubbed me the wrong way is dishonesty. The dishonesty was in saying we don't do anything in travel and we don't want to. They could change their minds, and I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. But even 10 years later, I still sort of feel.
Still remember, yeah.
And it's just I'll throw a little bit of shade, but I wish them well. But yeah, so they got involved, and there were lots of other companies that quickly started to explore the premise that conversational interfaces could be really important. And the basic thesis of these companies was that one day AI is going to be really good, and we're going to be able to take natural language instructions and automate it. And I think the sort of initial point of view was that would be better than navigational UI. I think what most of the players in the space, us included, came to discover was that navigational UI is actually quite good. And there's a very small, it exists, but there's a small set of use cases where the natural language interface is really good. But booking travel mostly isn't.
Talking about travel, when do you think I can just go to ChatGPT and type, book me a flight from San Francisco to New York City, this evening of this date, this is my seat, my credit card.
Well, first of all, I don't think you're going to want to
get it done.
But second of all, they have their plugin ecosystem. I know Expedia is an early partner there, and they'll experiment here. I don't really seriously think that ChatGPT will be the environment where this happens. I think the thing to watch here is the mobile operating systems, especially. There may be other there may be other assistant, there may be other dominant assistants that emerge, but the mobile operating systems are the obvious ones. So at some point, Siri, again, a lot of things just seem very imminent. Whether it's Google Assistant or whether it's Siri, at some point you can expect that these interfaces are conversational and are going to perform tasks like this for you in the form of a personal assistant. And I think one of the interesting questions that I'll be watching, and I think we're all watching, is how does the App Store evolve to meet conversational interfaces? If I can, will it be the case that people prefer to book restaurants by telling, Siri, hey, can you book a restaurant at one of the restaurants I like for Friday? or am I going to go to a Resi or OpenTable and do it manually myself? I tend to. I don't know. I don't know the answer. I think there is. I think one exciting idea is that automation is much easier when described with natural language than with the kinds of like workflow, like visual workflow design. Like I don't think OpenTable is going to help you define workflow automations, but I think that chat-based interfaces make that a lot more doable. So yeah, I'm very interested in how the App Store ecosystem evolves to integrate into these like new chat assistants, these new assistants, which I think will be chat-based, but again, we're so early.
What do you think of the ecosystem of plugins for ChatGPT? You know, you have when iPhone came out, a year later, App Store. Okay, great time to start building apps for iPhone in 2008. When Alexa came out, they created an app store for Alexa, and you started building Alexa apps and so forth. If for developers out there, would you spend your time building a plugin for ChatGPT, and why? Yes, why?
Not if you
why not?
Yeah, I think the bear case is like it's like aggregation theory stuff. It's like you never want to be modularized on somebody else's surface. So being a publisher was really bad for newspaper. Being a publisher was really bad because Google basically modularized that supply, and you basically just became commoditized against like the universe of content that was out there. I think in general that pattern is sort of reminiscent here. Like I think there will be many plugins that do lots of similar stuff. Then again, I think the most useful plugins will probably harness data that is they'll have unique data assets. So maybe my bull case isn't that there are any products I think will be plug-in first, but that lots of apps will be given greater life because they can manifest as plugins. And this sort of goes back to like our conversation about Facebook and the Facebook ecosystem, is that Facebook gave life to new applications. I think plugins will give life to new applications, but I think that predominantly like they will need to exist outside of plugin form. Mm-hmm. So like I'll give you sort of an example. I mean, I think the restaurant example is actually pretty good. And I'd say my overarching thesis here is that to the extent that there will be a battle around AI assistants, I think one of the main dimensions on which it will be waged is how much does the assistant know about you? And to talk about a sticky product, the assistant that knows you well, there's do you know the artist LCD Sound System?
Nope.
There was a song. I forget. It's like when somebody great is gone. I forget exactly. That's the lyric, but I forget. There's like some anyway. And the song is about him and his therapist, and it's some line about how like it's too late to start over with someone new. And I sort of think about the AI assistants this way. It's like if you spend time, making yourself known to the AI assistant, I don't think that information is necessarily easily portable. If I tell the AI agent, all my favorite restaurants, by the way, for better or worse, most of my examples about AI assistants always go back to the restaurant use case because it's an easy one to think about. I happen to think it's the most compelling one, but I also am conscious of the fact that it's like pretty it's pretty unimportant in the scheme of things, right? It's like a pretty like first world problem. Anyway, I think there will be other domains of knowledge that are personal to you where the agent's understanding of who you are and your preferences will make you unwilling to start over with something new. So I think that is sort of a really important strategic consideration for all the assistant companies, is like, can you build up a lead here and basically creating like intimacy with your users, having them understand, basically gaining an understanding of them and who they are, what they care about, what their preferences are.
One more space which you've thought about is workflow automation. What are some of your
painfully
some of the lessons learned and learnings and insights and maybe suggestions for entrepreneurs working in the space?
It's a really tough category. So for context, and I'll be relatively brief, I started, my last company was workflow automation startup. My co-founder Derek and I were inspired by company checklists. We believed that checklists were a really exciting document type and that they were under leveraged in companies. Our thesis was that we could transform company checklists for processes like customer onboarding into, let's call it an app form. So the idea was that a company would take its checklist, it would come into macro, and tasks that could be replaced with automations would be. And so, if you think about like TurboTax is like one of my favorite examples, there's some sequence of steps that go into preparing your tax return. There are lots of processes that exist in a company that should be TurboTaxed. Customer onboarding is one of them. Employee onboarding, one of them. Replit has done an amazing job building out workflow for employee onboarding. Anyway, we thought that there were lots of unique business processes that exist in companies, and that to serve this long tail of business processes, we would build tooling to do it, and we'd focus on checklist-based processes to start. In theory, it's a good idea. Like as I say it now, like I'm pretty much nodding along, about how we thought about it. The thing that got us into trouble was our belief in a couple of things. One was the sequencing. We thought we could go from checklists to more complex types of business processes. Our ultimate vision was we wanted to be effectively like a customizable CRM. We took a lot of inspiration from Salesforce as this tool that was, enabled companies to build all types of custom processes. Granted, maybe Salesforce didn't focus so much on checklist-based processes, but we saw these things as ultimately linked and as part of the same product shape. Maybe that was wrong. The sequencing was probably wrong too. Checklists probably weren't the right place to start. But anyway, we focused on this long tail. As I look back on it, and I've written my postmortem, it's like my own personal document. I've recorded.
Did you publish it?
No.
Yeah.
I may at some point, but part of my reason in not publishing it is it's not fully my story to tell, right? It's okay. Derek's as well, and also I wrote it for me. I didn't write it for anyone else. When you do a retrospective or you do a postmortem, we know the answer. Like we know the conclusion. The conclusion is the company failed. So when I look back, everything is tinted with this sort of failure tinted glasses, right? So I look at all the decisions from the vantage or from the perspective of, well, I'm primed to see things I'm primed to see the fault in things. There were lots of things about, but here's sort of the more generous take. More generous take is we were building horizontal productivity software. The baseline outcome in that domain, the baseline outcome in any startup is failure. That is particularly true in productivity. Productivity is a notoriously difficult category. It's extremely competitive. Everything is competitive. But there are big companies with big ad spend, and it's really hard to differentiate. If you ask me to tell you the difference between Asana, Monday, and ClickUp, first of all, I don't remember. I think Asana is the best. I actually have a lot of respect for Asana as a product, but we didn't see ourselves as one of those. We saw ourselves as like true enterprise software, like where the ticket size or the price per user per month was going to be more than $10, right? We were building a heavy duty system that would support customer onboarding process, which we saw as like a real high value process in a company. If we set out to build customer onboarding, if we set out to build a customer success tool around customer onboarding, I think that probably would have been a smarter thing to do, but I didn't really want to build a customer onboarding tool. That was probably naive. That was probably immature thinking. I think I probably got caught in the trap, and we talked about this earlier, right? About, what are we looking for when we build a company? Are we looking for success, or are we looking for some sort of artistic expression? For some of us, unfortunately, I think we can be driven by this need to build something special, and I was. So even though I had sort of warned myself in 2019 against doing this, I sort of did it anyway. But I wanted to build something that I thought was really special, and I was also taking a big swing. My first company, I bowed out. We raised one round of funding. We got acquired a month after we launched. This time I was going big. So anyway, I didn't want to, not that, customer onboarding would have been going small, but I wanted to build something horizontal. I didn't want to specialize around vertical. I didn't want to specialize around industry. I didn't want to specialize in function or industry. And, that just puts you, that may have been a fatal error from the get-go. But it was a tall ask. If we had figured it out, it would have been a huge company, right? If you look at publicly traded companies, a few of them are task management companies. There are more task management companies that are public companies than there are customer success software. Mm-hmm. I think the only one is Gainsight, and I don't even know if Gainsight is still public. So anyway, we got to a point, we built a product. It was a great product. I still think it was a great product. We had pretty decent customer traction. People loved using the product, but they were taking us down a path to build a task management tool and not to build this general workflow creator. And we just, sort of figured that this was not the direction that we wanted to go down.
Describe me the ideal scenario. Well, describe me the product in more detail. Let's say I'm a clinic.
Yeah.
I have a checklist of things. So I go on your product. I go on your website. I add my checklist. Let's say for a doctor, and then every single item in that checklist is a workflow.
Every item in that checklist is an assignable task. Some of those tasks may be things like sending an email. In the case of sending an email, we had a built-in Gmail widget. It was basically the compose box that you see in Gmail, but embedded. We built our own email client effectively inside of the workflow. So you can think about like a TurboTax style workflow where get to step 3 and it calls for sending an email to the customer. Well, there's a templated email already filled out. You as the human running the process can change the content of the email. We had variables, replacing where you could replace variables with values that were unique to the process that you were running. You could create and run checklists. You could assign checklists to directly responsible individuals. You could assign individual tasks within the checklist to specific people. So it was really supposed to, mimic the kind of workflow functionality that you would get in a dedicated tool, right? Like if I built a customer onboarding tool directly, the intention was that you would get basically the same level of coordination and automation in macro. But instead of having, one tool for customer onboarding and another tool for some other, for some other business process, you could use macro as sort of a all-in-one custom workflow creator. It's really hard to do that.
Speaking about productivity as a category, what's your take on Notion as a company? On it's a, as you said, super competitive space. Now they're sort of going to the Microsoft territory.
Yes.
And Microsoft is known for building an equivalent product, putting it on top of their distribution, winning. They did it with Slack. They did it with a bunch of other companies. So Microsoft against Notion. What's your take?
I'm not familiar enough with Notion's like enterprise traction. Like I can speak to it from a product perspective, which, by the way, I think Microsoft is like extraordinarily well positioned. Microsoft is amazing.
Yeah.
I
stopped using Dropbox. I was a big Dropbox user for a long time.
Yep.
But in the past 6 years, I'm completely.
By the way, I'm rooting for Dropbox in this current LLM moment.
Okay.
I don't know exactly how they seize on it or how they leverage it, but I think this is the best opportunity they've had in a long time to make an interesting move. And they've been sort of struggling for a while. They're a public company, and most of their competitors are dead. Certainly not public.
They succeeded 100%.
Yeah, they're a very successful company.
Yeah.
We should all be so successful, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think they've certainly underwhelmed. At least they've certainly underwhelmed expectations for public market investors. But anyway, on the Microsoft question, Microsoft has these big tech companies are really well structured. Really smart people have architected their product strategy. So Google, has we talked about earlier, they have these multiple layers of strategic synergies, and Microsoft is similar. Microsoft, I'm not as familiar with Microsoft products because fortunately or unfortunately, I spent most of my career working at relatively smaller companies. But Microsoft has Active Directory, they have the Office suite, they have Outlook, they have Calendar. So you look at, we were talking a little bit earlier about assistants. We talked mostly about consumer assistants. You look at enterprise. Microsoft has a really full picture of what is going on inside of your company. You apply an LLM that has perspective across your organization, what your org chart looks like, your documents, your email, your calendar. You have an AI intelligence has perspective over pretty much probably the majority of important enterprise information that exists in your company. In addition, they have first class potential for automation across, or again, a majority of your enterprise stack. So they are super, super well situated, to say nothing of Azure and OpenAI. It is a really, really well constructed set of strategic building blocks. But I think for Notion, head to head as a document editor, I don't know the answer. But as a next generation productivity suite, it's not even close. Microsoft is they are the Death Star. And Notion is a little X-wing.
Yeah. What are some of the fundamental views on startup success? Did you which you updated along the way? We discussed some of the things. Maybe some other views you updated.
We've sort of gone through over a decade of adventures in startup land, and I've done things that I definitely wouldn't do again, right? Me and Minchie starting something just for the sake of starting something, just because we wanted to work together and coming up with ideas. That list of ideas we came up with, I think that's crazy. We got lucky on Hyper in that regard, right? We found something that was interesting technology, that was interesting at the moment, and I think it set us down an interesting journey. Had we not gotten acquired, I like to believe that we would have figured something out important in travel. But I still don't really like that path for founders. I think that my most controversial view as an investor is probably, and I reserve the right to update this view, and I'll probably change my mind because I think most investors I respect take the opposite one. I don't really believe in founder bets. There are really great founders. There are a lot of really great founders. Maybe there's a question of how many Elons there are and how many Travis Kalanick's there are, but and maybe that's the game. So if that's the game, then yes, I believe in founder bets. For me, what I look for is really a combination. It's that and it's both and. It's, are you exceptional? Are you an exceptional founder? And also, are you drawing on some unique understanding of the world? I like to see both. At pre-seed, I don't think it matters. At pre-seed, pick founders. Like, don't worry too much about exactly what they're working on. They'll figure it out. And if they don't, it's just a pre-seed check. But if you're writing, $3, $4, $5, $6, $7 million, like, I just feel like it warrants, at least for me, I don't feel comfortable making that bet unless I have a real perspective on the space they're operating in, and trust that the founders that I'm going to be working with have a unique perspective and have real knowledge, real depth, not just superficial market analysis. They've done some, interesting 2x2s. They've done some interesting, metaphorical thinking, and they've taken an analog of
to why now.
Yeah. Like, they'll look at, I'll give you a dumb idea. Like, Airtable doesn't have built-in task management. So someone wants to go build an Airtable that handles task management better. Like, that's an observation. And like, I spent some time thinking about productivity software. So it's like not a dumb idea, but it's for sure a fake idea. It is for sure not like deeply rooted in a specific customer problem. And that was the sort of the fatal error of macro. We had really interesting ideas about productivity software, but we were trying to build a general horizontal use case. And sometimes it works, but I think Notion is the exception rather than the rule. But the problem, of course, in venture is that the exceptions are the rule, right? You're looking for the exceptions. Maybe if we'd done what Notion did and spent, 4 years in the darkness, maybe we would have figured it out. But yeah, it's hard. I don't have a clear answer on that question. But as for things that I've updated, yeah, I'm definitely less excited by founders just like going out there and exploring ideas. I'm much more attuned to founders that like have developed some like substantive point of view. Mm-hmm. I look for substance more. And I'm sure I've changed quite a bit else. I think the easiest way for me to generate items here is just to think about things that I regret. I think the other thing that I regret is, which is maybe how I get there, is, and something I've changed my view on, is patience, which is connected to the first thing. It's not forcing it. Should I have started a company in 2014 with Minchi? In some respects, yes. Like, I regard that as a success. In some respects, I forced it for sure. 2018, deciding to go start another company without an idea. I don't know. Macro didn't work out, but I got to work with Derek, which was a true privilege. And I got to learn up close and, from somebody that I admire and learned a tremendous amount from. That education, I think, is amazing, right? So it's hard to do these counterfactuals of what if, but I think as a general philosophy, ways in which I've changed, maybe not my views concretely, I'm more patient now. And I probably advise people to be, but.
Career strategy question. Let's say we have aspiring VCs, aspiring investors in the audience.
Yep.
Let's talk about different strategies, how you can get there, with potentially describing some examples. Yeah.
The irony of career strategy, I think, goes back to this patience thing. And when you're young, you have no patience and lots of time. And when you're old, and I'm not saying I'm old, but I feel generationally older than I was when I started my career. And so I'm for sure more patient now than I was back then. My general viewpoint on career strategy has changed. When I was 22, I felt that if I didn't start a $1 billion company by the time I was 30, I'd failed. Well, 30 has come and gone. I guess I failed. But it's somewhat liberating to move past that. So now I get to focus on what I think is deserving of my time and not, immature, insecure 22-year-old's life philosophy. So, decade plus later, my viewpoint is do great work. Do great work, become very knowledgeable, learn. Those are the things that I care about today. My view is I trust that if I do these things, good things will follow. And there's something I think there's something empowering about the forge your own reality perspective of don't be patient. Like, you want to be a founder? Go be a freaking founder. And I think, Keith Boy maybe he doesn't believe that. Maybe he has a more nuanced take on career development. But his perspective on product market fit is it's forged. You don't just like wait around and, wait for, Eric Ries customer development and customers telling you exactly what they want and then you go build it. Like, it doesn't work that way, right? I think there are lots of paths to success in venture. I think there are lots of paths to success as being a founder. But I think that the sort of guiding thread is the people who do the best. I think not all. Listen, there are some people whose virtues I find less appealing or accessible to the eye in venture and as founders as well. You sort of look at them, you talk to them, and they don't find them particularly impressive. Maybe they just got lucky. There's enough of them that like it probably does happen, but that's probably the exception. I would say, overall, the best founders I've met, the best investors I've met, they're very good at what they do. And I think the thing that like has been useful to them, and I'm speaking at a high level and I'm sort of saying this on the fly, is like they got good at the thing that makes them good. For some people it's different, right? I would say, take my friend Ashe, who's a partner at Haystack. Ashe, I met him when he was in college, and he reached out because I think he liked a blog post I wrote, and we became friends and talked. And he's just super smart and has an insatiable intellectual appetite, and he's just super knowledgeable. Has become a student of startups in the best way, and I think that he is an example of someone who, he hasn't started a $1 billion company. However, I think he's a phenomenal venture investor. If I were going to start another company, he's the kind of investor I would want on my side. And I think it's a credit to his curiosity, to his intellect. But I think, the muscle he has, I'm sure there are lots of ways in which he is excellent. But I think that it's not an accident, and he works really hard at it and has worked really hard at it for a while. Who are other people I admire? I'll give you like my sister. My sister's a founder.
Phenomenal founder.
She's a phenomenal founder. She started a company called The Skim. And she and her co-founder Danielle are just extraordinary founders. Now, their careers, before they were doing this, they worked in the news business, and they became great journalists. They became great producers of the news. They worked that muscle, right? And so I think having those reps, investing in doing great work, set them up for doing more great work. So, I give these examples, and I guess the point of them is really just to say it's sort of, I forget what's the term, because we've been going on for a while. It's sort of tautological is the word, to say, great, people who do great things have, a history of doing great things. It reminds me of the Paul Graham line that we talk about. He borrows from Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. How do you paint perfectly, become perfect, and paint naturally? Mm-hmm. My perspective on being a great founder, being a great investor, is become great, do great work. If you're somebody who, you're unique, the thing that you're great at, the thing that you can be great at is building stuff. Like, go build more things, become great at building. If the thing that you think you can be great at is understanding technology companies from maybe a more academic perspective, go do that. Like, go be great at that. So that's what I try to focus on personally. I haven't always done this. I think I've been maybe too objective oriented. My objective for a long time was start $1 billion company. That's not my objective now. My objective now is, I've used this term a couple of times, so I'm going to cringe when I say this, but my objective now is be a great technologist. That is, understand technology companies better than anyone, or at least at an elite level, right? You always want to be the best. Understanding technology companies at an elite level. If I want to build stuff, building things, following my creativity that way, being a participant in the ecosystem, and not just, somebody who spouts off on Twitter. These are the things. Being when I interact with founders, being like value add, even to the founders I don't work with. I think if I do that and actually like treat that as a discipline, I will be better than most investors, at least on an important dimension. Not the only one, but it's an important one.
When you talk about venture as a career, if we were to discuss tactics as opposed to strategy, obviously there are many different paths to success. You have Marc Andreessen, who was initially an amazing engineer who became a founder when venture investing was a final punchline in his arc, and he could convert all that reputation into that. Or you had Sarah Guo, which we discussed before the program, became a great investor in Greylock, different path altogether, and then now he got to start her own firm, Conviction, building on the reputation she's built before. Maybe talk about those tactics, maybe with some examples of successful VCs, and the inverse of that, talk about strategies rather tactics, or which lead to failure if you want to become a venture capitalist.
I discuss all these things with a large dose of humility because I've only been doing this for 5-6 months. But my perspective as somebody relatively new to venture, take Marc Andreessen. So you gave that example. Marc is one of the most important. They call him a tech luminary. He's one of the most important people in technology ever. Right? He's a historically important person. You'll be in textbooks, which you can't say for most venture capitalists, let alone people, writ large. So he wants to go start a venture fund. Like, obviously, he can go start a venture fund.
2009. It's kind of odd now to think that he only raised $300 million.
Back then, I guess that wasn't as much. So Marc is, a luminary, and it's very easy for him to convince LPs, to convince founders to work with him in the ways in which they do. It's also very easy for him to recruit other great investors. Andreessen, for that reason, great firm. There are many different paths to venture. Thinking about other people. You mentioned Sarah Guo. Like, Sarah became famous as a great investor, not as a founder. So that's certainly one path. She's, one that comes to mind on that path. Then there are people who, they've operated. They, haven't been founders necessarily, but they have been at important roles. At the companies that they've worked at. Maybe they've worked at an important company. I don't want to name too many names, but I think that's one archetype. If you come up with a name, I'm happy to talk about them, but I want to be careful. So I think there are many different paths to which I would say, to young people who want to get into venture, one path is certainly go be a really successful founder. But of course, if your intent is to ultimately be an investor, going and suffering and doing all the things that founders have to do to go be an investor strikes me as maybe a roundabout way to get there. You see people who... See, I struggle with this because I've seen a lot of people who start their careers in venture. And we talked about Ashe. Ashe is a great investor who started his career in venture. Nikhil had experience as a founder of Artsy at Princeton, but post Princeton, he spent his career as an investor, and now he started his own fund. I am tempted to say that if you're a young person and you want to go do venture, you should go do venture, right? There's enough. There's a pattern, there's a smattering of people who have done that and have been successful at the job. I think some people have, Vinod Khosla famously said actually at an Upfront Summit, he was like, you would only take advice from investors who have been founders themselves. I don't think that's true. I don't think being a founder gives you some unique privilege to be able to comment on other companies. Perhaps it gives you more empathy. And listen, I would love for the founders that I work with to appreciate that when I say things, I'm saying it from the perspective of somebody who's gone through this experience.
Just like in sports, the best soccer coaches are not necessarily the best players, and most of them didn't even play soccer.
Exactly. You look at basketball. Steve Kerr was a mediocre basketball player on the professional level, at least, and he is one of the greatest coaches of all time. Pat Riley, was a fine, basketball player when he was a player and turned out to be one of the greatest coaches of all time. Phil Jackson, the same. I'm not sure that the player coach analogy is totally right in venture. Maybe it is, but I think the nature of the job is it is multifaceted, and we have famous and successful venture capitalists who come from all kinds of backgrounds. You have journalists. You have a number of journalists who have become successful venture capitalists.
Yeah, you build distribution as a journalist, and then
or even Mike Moritz. So there are lots of different backgrounds. I do think that. Listen, I think that in general, you as a person I think in general, people should try to become as knowledgeable as they can. And I think that while venture provides a certain type of knowledge, you don't get the same type of depth that you get from working at a company and knowing on the ground, not just what different departments want or different stakeholders want, but literally picturing the person. When I think about what marketing teams want, I literally think about the market, specific people that I previously interacted with when I was at Venmo or when I was at TradeShift. When I think about, what engineers want, I'm thinking about what I wanted when I was an engineer or what my colleagues wanted. I think when you're an investor, you just it's all so abstract. What you lose in concrete depth of knowledge, you make up for in seeing the broader patterns, So, somebody who's spent their time working in, as a security engineer, they may not appreciate the strategic dynamics that exist, for, they may not have the same kind of perspective on general patterns that enterprise investors see over and over again. Those things are helpful. I think it is helpful to take an investor attitude towards startup ideas. Investors are not useless. We see things, we see things, we see patterns. We are students of technology, and we study patterns that help us to make better predictions around how technology markets are going to shape out. There are good things to learn from that. You see lots of companies that build, contrary to the YC lesson, there's a YC school of thought which says, go build what customers want. Don't give a crap about anything else. The downside of just building what people want, in my opinion, is that strategy kind of matters at like a certain level. Like at an order of magnitude, like if you're trying to build $1 billion business, I think you have to not just find something that customers want, but that like customers want and which can eventually like own some center of gravity. It can be important, not just like loved by a particular user, but important. So listen, maybe it's impossible to predict that at the early stages, or it's so difficult it's not worth trying. And maybe that's the best advice for founders, but I don't know that it's the best advice for venture investors.
One thing we discussed before recording started, is which stage is better in the sense that as a pre-seed investor, you get to invest, you get to have maybe, let's say, 30 shots at goal.
Yep.
And tell us more about sort of this distinction.
Well, the dynamics of being a pre-seed investor are just different, right? Like take YC as an extreme, as a point in the extreme. So YC invests now like 300 something companies
a year.
Like for them, it is very straightforward. These are founder bets, right? They get lots of shots on goal. I think they can be. I just think the game is a little bit different. If you are, more straightforward pre-seed fund and you're trying to build your reputation, I think that's really what we were talking about earlier. What you're looking for is you want to be the investor who, got Instacart, that got Uber, that got, Facebook early. That's how you're going to make your career as an investor. If you're at the seed stage, you get, fewer shots on goal because the check sizes are bigger. So that's one of the advantages of being a pre-seed investor. You see some pre-seed funds that, brag about, having been early. And don't get me wrong, like these are, it is impressive. And I think, the world of, a number of pre-seed investors. But, I think I happen to think seed is the hardest. I think seed and A are the hardest.
Why is that?
Because you get fewer bets to make and, but you may still be betting on really incomplete information. So, there's, if you think about how many, there's some score that takes into consideration, like, how many bets you can make and how much, information exists for each of those bets. And, I'd say seed is quite difficult.
You mentioned that you view your current objective is to be a great technologist. And as a technologist, there are profound ideas and frameworks which good technologists know, and some of them they create those frameworks. You know, you have disruptive innovation, Clayton Christensen. There is Lean Startup by Eric Ries.
Yep.
You have aggregation theory with Ben Thompson. Maybe discuss some other frameworks which made a difference in the technology space among founders, investors, and so forth, and maybe some theories which might not be popular among maybe there are some other unknown frameworks which are worth discussing.
Well, I can list a few of mine. I'm sure other people have articulated this in their own way, but one of the ones that I care a great deal about, I've written a blog post on this, I call fishing upstream. And the idea of fishing upstream is basically, there's tons of competition for in markets where there's lots of competition. So I take YC as an example. So investing before YC, tons of competition for venture funding. And, for venture funds, they sort of had a lot of leverage in the market. And, what they wanted to see was, companies that had, made a lot of progress and had lots to show for it. And YC came out here and they said, well, you know what? We'll actually take a bet before companies are ready for, seed funding, for formal venture funding. And by operating upstream, YC saw founders before they were being seen by YC's competitors. So, the way I look at it, I see this pattern over and over again. And once you start thinking about it, you'll see it in lots of places. Going after, customer segments, and trying to going after customer segments that maybe are not currently appreciated by your competitors, I think is a very useful and effective strategy that I see time and time again. Replit is one of my favorite examples. Their users skew really young. Having users that skew young has the benefit that, as new trends emerge, first of all, you'll discover them because young people tend to discover them. And secondly, they're not bought into incumbent patterns. So you get them before the incumbents do. Lots of engineers learned how to code on Replit rather than, in GitHub. It's not to say that these things are exclusive of each other, but just that, Replit had a better chance of defining developer practices for young developers than old. This is one of the reasons, sort of as from a philosophical standpoint, that revolutions tend to be, youth movements. You go back to Socrates. Socrates is sentenced to hemlock because he is poisoning the minds of the youth. Well, the Athenians were smart. They knew that what young people think is very dangerous. There are lots of reasons for that, but I think there is this sort of timeless idea that what younger people are doing is radical. There's a radicalism to youth. There's a radicalism to things that are just a little bit upstream. And that's a very good space for startups to play. So I think YC, as a startup in its own right, did that with venture investing. SPC did it to YC instead of investing in founders once they had startup ideas. They basically worked with founders when they were looking for ideas.
Neo is doing something similar.
The -1 to 0 phase. Neo does something similar. On Deck was going even earlier than SPC. SPC targeted folks when they were once they had quit their job. And On Deck was focusing on people who, early
before
on.
they quit.
Before they quit, right? So you just keep, pushing the cones back. Probably the other framework I think a lot about is sort of my own, which I don't really talk about a lot, but it's not really a framework. It's just an idea that what you want to be as a software company is the center of gravity. Systems of record become centers of gravity. It's not the only way to become a center of gravity. Figma, no system of record, but it is for sure a center of gravity. Zendesk, center of gravity. And the way that I think about centers of gravity is sort of this celestial metaphor of gravity. It's you've got planets, and the big planets are going to pull things into their orbit. And you don't want to be too close. You're too close, you're going to crash. So that's what you see. That's sort of the metaphor I use in thinking about, adjacencies that are playing a little bit too close to where they should be. I think a number of LLM startups are going to get burned by this analogy or this metaphor. They're playing a little bit close to the sun, a little bit close to these large, enterprise celestial objects. But yeah, there's nice. I probably am more framework heavy than average.
Hence the question.
Yeah.
I know that. In the interest of time, blitz style.
Let's do it.
I want to give you a few concepts, and then if you could describe them with a one-liner.
Yep.
And this concept are coming from some of your writing. Thin edge of a wedge. What does it stand for?
The small product offering that gets you in the door.
An example.
What is the best example of thin edge of the wedge? Carta my favorite is OpenTable. So OpenTable sold a scheduling system or a table reservation system to restaurants. They sell literal computers running their software. And then once they had built out supply, then they were able to expand into being a marketplace for reservations.
Wonderful. Bowling pin strategy.
Ooh, bowling pin. You go after I think this is originally
Chris Dixon?
It's Chris Dixon, but Chris Dixon borrows it from someone else I'm forgetting. But anyway, bowling pin strategy is basically you go after a part of the market that people don't particularly care about right now, usually, and then you can expand into other markets. So as opposed to focusing on small product innovation as like in thin edge of the wedge, you're here focusing on sort of market innovation.
Wonderful. In the internet organizations, you have a few cool ideas. One of them is Prometheus. What's that?
I call Promethean startups which democratize access to some privileged resource. Maybe a good example, a sort of fine example is like Betterment or Wealthfront democratizing, private wealth management to lay people.
Robinhood did it for trading.
Robinhood's a great example. If you were a lay person and you wanted to do options trading, I suppose you could get set up on I forgot what they're called, but interactive brokers. But they certainly consumerized it in a way that interactive brokers would never.
Fun fact: 2011 at the Princeton Startup Weekend or some pitch competition, the idea I was pitching is papers for the masses.
Oh my God! Yeah.
Anyway,
I remember that.
Pooled resources.
Pooled resources. I mean, so I talked about this in my internet organizations piece, but I just have this is sort of goes back to like internet idealism. It's belief in the internet as as social technology that allows people to do big things together potentially. Ethereum is a great example where effectively what's being pooled is compute resource. But there are other examples. I think the canonical example is probably Kickstarter.
Mm-hmm. Aggregated labor.
Aggregated labor I talk about also in that internet organizations piece. Talent agencies are a type of aggregated labor. Labor unions are aggregated labor, both in their own way. One is network, one more is just pure like economies of scale. They both provide some advantages, owing to size and network strength. And in a labor context, for talent agencies, the story of CAA is that Ovitz was. He started out with the writers, and then once he had the writers on board, he could package the writers with, famous actors. And basically they got to a point where, because they had the best talent on CAA or a great, aggregation of talent, they had some leverage in putting projects forward that, benefited the CAA network. They wouldn't, I don't know if they would call it a network, but I would call it a network.
Software for professional tribes.
Yeah, I thought about this as a potential startup idea way back when. LinkedIn has had a target on its back for a long time. As that's where professional networking occurs online. I wondered if there was a new angle at attacking LinkedIn that would sort of be based around this idea of tribes, professional tribes. And I think that, for me, I have one. My friends and I have come up together. We've worked together. We've seen our careers develop together, and we're all rooting for each other, and we all in our own way will help each other. And I wondered if there was value in formalizing those relationships with software and trying to extract as much value as possible from these software tribes. I never pursued it, but I thought it was an interesting set of ideas.
You gave an example of Bookface at YC.
Bookface is exactly. Bookface is the best, is the most powerful software-based tribe that I'm part of. I can search Bookface and see what kinds of challenges and what solutions companies have gone through in the past, and it's just a wonderful resource. It's an incredible resource of startup knowledge and requests and favors and all sorts of stuff.
There's a category for investors. You have the YC founders give reviews to.
There's an investor
investors.
database, which now I can't see because I'm no longer an active YC company.
And apparently there's a category called "Only If You Must." So sort of anyway, internet kibbutzniks.
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to sort of my contemplations around what are ways that people on the internet can band together and do things together. I called it internet kibbutzniks, which is a sort of funny term. It's, kibbutz is it's basically like an Israeli socialist kind of cooperative. They share land. They share potentially profits. They live off of the land. They may have some sort of industry together. But the idea of like what are ways for us to live and work and take care of each other. There are obviously like real world versions of this, like a kibbutz. What does the online analog to that look like? I think DAOs. I wrote this before I even knew what a DAO was back in 2018. But I think that DAOs are probably the most ambitious approach to this. I will say, as a side note, I read book recommendation is Weaving the Web by Tim Berners-Lee. And I think one of the most interesting things about the book, one of the most surprising things, he actually anticipates the rise of DAOs. He was inspired by, when they created the web, they created all these standards bodies. And he was excited by this idea of, it's effectively similar to open source software, but people across the globe collaborating together, having governance, making decisions together. And I think he presaged the idea that more organizations like this could exist on the internet. I share that dream.
Final section, top 3.
Yep.
Top 3 books from Peter Zakin.
Books, The Counterlife by Philip Roth, Great Expectations, Charles Dickens, and I could throw in another Roth. I love Portnoy's Complaint. Maybe that'll get me canceled these days. Maybe a better suggestion would be I like Weaving the Web. I think it's an important book. Movies. The Great Beauty, which I love. It's a great. It's actually an Italian language movie. Goodfellas. Love Goodfellas. And a third. I would say I have a strange fondness for. I don't know if it's Willy Wonka or Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Documentaries.
The Last Dance. I love The Last Dance. I rewatch The Last Dance when I'm feeling uninspired.
Podcasts.
Obviously,
/ YouTube
nFactorial when it's in English.
/ YouTube channels.
I am.
Hopefully, will be more in English. Yeah. Moving forward.
There's Eric Tornberg has a podcast with Dan Ramiro and some other folks called Moment of Zen, which I think is quite good. Antonio Garcia Martinez is also on that. I'm not a religious listener, but I think it's quite good. I love the Acquired podcast. I didn't even know about the Acquired podcast, embarrassingly, until relatively recently. It's terrific. I tweeted relatively recently. I was like, somebody should do something, and I was effectively just saying that somebody should build or make the Acquired podcast. But I love tech history. I think they do it so well. I admire those guys.
Top 3 restaurants in New York City, San Francisco.
All right, I'll do LA. Okay. In LA, All Time. I love All Time. Bestia, and There's a seafood shop in Santa Monica, which I love, that I think is great, called Crudo y Nudo.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Peter. And the final one is a question to our audience. Anything you're curious about?
What am I most wrong about?
Wonderful. So the question from Peter is what is he most wrong about, and very curious to see what you will share there. We planned out one more section, which we will not do it this time. Peter is an amazing product thinker, has lots of ideas, and if you follow him on Twitter at what's your Twitter handle?
P Zakin, Zakin.
Yeah, if you follow him on Twitter, you can see a lot of ideas he shares there. He was there are quite a few, like personalized podcasting, like turning bookshelves into spreadsheets, and many more. So a great place to engage your mind. Peter, thank you so much for finding time in your busy schedule. Apologies for turning this into a very, very long episode, but
this was a marathon.
This was a marathon. There's so much to talk about, and I really wanted you to share some of the great ideas. Every time I talk to you, I learn something new, and this conversation was no exception. Wish you all the best, and hope to see you more often.
Thank you for having me. It was great to see you.
This was nFactorial Podcast. Be so good they cannot ignore you.